across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome to the home of common sense. Loads to get through here this afternoon. Labour now targeting savers as Rachel Reeves looks to cut the cash ISA allowance, potentially from 20,000 down to 12,000. That's good of her, isn't it? Rumours, of course, of tax hikes, wealth taxes and a manifesto breach. A shambolic budget run-up has stalled property. It's hit the markets. It's left taxpayers adrift. With only 1 day to go. As we sit here now, literally in 24 hours, she'll be up there at the dispatch box. Will Rachel Reeves save the economy and her job? Can this be done? Is there something Labour could do to turn it around? Your thoughts on that? Also, Nigel Farage has said he never directly racially abused anyone back at school, acknowledging teenage banter that might be viewed differently today, but denying any direct, unpleasant personal abuse amid claims that he made racist and anti-Semitic remarks at school half a century ago. And BBC Chairman Samir Shah has refused to resign despite a split board after MPs heard a sharp difference over responding to the Telegraph bias revelations. The row centres, of course, on that Panorama documentary that spliced together those elements of the Donald Trump speech. More on that as well. Everything you need to know. We'll bring you all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. We have a problem in government. We kind of know that. Rachel Reeves sits in the engine room right now, ready to crank the handles of financial doom. Few will escape the tyranny of Boomerang Rach. Out of her depth doesn't even cover it. Our Chancellor and credibility are through the floor. Let's just say, I mean, the trust has gone. If Rachel Reeves went into the funeral business, people would stop dying. That's how bad things have got. But none of this, apparently, we're not allowed to say, because Rachel Reeves has blamed sexism for the mayhem surrounding her budget. It's all about sexism because of this. She's begged Labour MPs to get behind the plans, adding to the big old list of factors that she's blamed over the last few months. She's Tory austerity, which finished about a billion years ago. Brexit, which finished about a billion years ago. Donald Trump she's blaming as well. She says she's been the victim of misogyny. It's all about misogyny. Ridiculous. Sort yourself out, sweet cheeks. Rachel Reeves is set to slash free saving pots in her budget. We know this much. A major blow to hard savers. It looks as if she's going to drop the tax-free allowance on ISAs. It's the kind of thing you can get for your kid as well. The tax-free allowance is going to go down from 20,000 apparently to 12,000, so she'll get a little bit of money there. They're also likely to see a new tax on milkshakes and lattes. How did lattes get in there? I love a latte. Surely it's not going to be in my local coffee shop, is it? It's going to be one of those pre-packed lattes, whatever it happens to be. This is how bad things have got at the Treasury. This is because they're scared witless to do the right thing and look at slashing spending, where you need to go around the place, frankly, with a fiscal scythe and look at the areas of mammoth wastage or areas where we've just got to kind of we need to recalibrate the economy, our expectations of the economy, everything from the NHS to education. We've just got to look at what we believe a government can do. And the problem with left-wing thinking, it always thinks that governments can do more than it actually can. And when it doesn't do it, it accuses the government of some kind of wrongdoing, or if it's the Tories that are in power, some kind of evilness taking place. And the government cannot do everything. And certainly it can't do everything with the amount of money it's got to spend. So it has to look at doing it in a different way. But year on year, we sort of plug holes and try and fill gaps in these rather clumsy ways in order to try and balance the books and come out with a big old budget. Somebody somewhere has got to actually pitch up, be completely honest and say, we are changing the whole thing. that we're going to change everything. We're going to change the way. We need to manage our expectations. I think that's the biggest thing. The NHS, the greatest example of misplaced expectation is in our health service. The idea that we think this is a sort of one-size-fits-all, everybody's welcome, pile in from bunions to some terrible illness. We can get the whole lot done. It's going to cost you jack. Nothing at all. That's got to go. That kind of thinking has got to be revised. But I'm going to be, I wouldn't say generous here, and I'm not asking this as a daft question, a genuine question. What could Labour do in this budget that could win you over? Quite seriously, we know it's going to be carnage, and they used to talk about chancellors pulling a rabbit out of the hat, didn't they? Oh, and before we go, one final announcement. I think the Tories did it with, I think they did it with the living wage. I seem to remember that might have been one area where suddenly there was this moment of, wow, the Tories are upping the living wage. I don't know if that's been the case for the last few budgets, whether there's a real beauty that gets pulled out and shuts up all the critics. That's the, what do you want that rabbit to look like, essentially? What could Rachel Reeves do in this budget tomorrow to win you over? Is there anything Labour could do in order for you to kind of go, OK, fundamentally disagree with them, I'd still never vote for them, but fair play on this? What would that be for you? 0344 499 1000. Might be a drop of childcare, could be something to do with the education system, might be about fuel duty, because that's going to get hit. I'll tell you what they're going to really hit. I reckon, things like cigarettes, they're going to massively go for that like never before. And petrol, of course, is now a dirty word. You might as well suggest, you're putting a killer drug into your tanks. I mean, it's discussed like we're discussing heroin these days. So that's going to really, I think, take a hit. But what could they do? What could Labour do? Serious question, to literally win you over. I'm not hopeful. I might sit here all afternoon with a completely blank switchboard. Well, frankly, there's nothing they could do. I'm talking about in budgetary terms. Is there something there that you look at and think, you never know, it's just possible? It's just possible. Or is it? Let's get a word on this from Oscar Redrop, former number 10 advisor. Oscar, good afternoon to you. Always good to have you with us. Of course, we now know we've got some details. I mean, we've talked before about budgets leaking, but this one is like a moody sieve. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, we've almost got the whole budget coming out. Now we're hearing about ISIS, we might hear about them as well. Maybe they're invited to stay in one of those hotels, who knows. ISA allowance, tax-free allowance going down from 20,000 to 12. We know there's the issues surrounding things like milkshakes and all these little taxes, because it appears she's lost the bottle to go substantial on anything. So they've had to sort of look around and pull out that little treasury file that mentions all of these kind of little bits and then add it all together and it'll make the difference. That's the suggestion. The Tories don't think any of this is the way to run a country. It's worth having a little listen to this and a view of this for those watching. This is what the Conservative Party did yesterday on the side of the Treasury building. Have a look.
Tax rises for working people. We're not going to be raising tax on working people.
We will not raise taxes on working people.
We're not putting up taxes on working people.
We're not going to increase tax on working people, and that means
that Labour will not be putting up taxes on working people.
I am announcing an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. This budget raises taxes by £40 billion.
We've now wiped the slate clean. It's now on us. It's now on us. It's now on us. We don't need to increase taxes further.
Chancellor refuses to rule out tax rises in the upcoming budget.
As I take my decisions on both tax and spend, I will do what is necessary to tax and spend.
I'm hearing about you in the news that you like taxes.
Well, yes, I think the answer is yes to that one, Oscar. Don't you?
Depressingly so, and I think it just has aged so. That's very funny, isn't it? It's just aged so depressingly poorly when you think about that manifesto pledge. It was a stupid thing to have said, particularly when they probably knew within themselves they didn't have the imagination or actually the political will to make those welfare slashes, to enact policies that engender growth and productivity. They knew all along that tax rises were going to come. Classic tax and spend Labour policy. And that is where we sit now. I think probably the most outrageous thing politically about all this has been, you know, Rachel Reeves talking about damaging leaks, and Keir Starmer and people like Peter Kyle, the business secretary, saying, you know, we can't comment on the budget, you know, for months now because it's all just speculation that you guys in the media are pushing around. It hasn't been leaks. It is the government that have been briefing this stuff out. How can the government brief out these constant, you know, policies and U-turns, and kind of, you're probably giving them too much credit for saying that it's, you know, they're cleverly trying to test, you know, public attitudes and appetite for certain things. The government have proactively briefed out ahead of the budget directions and actually quite specific budgetary policies, and then they get in front of media cameras and they go, hang on a minute, guys, it's your guys' fault, all this speculation you're creating. That is outrageous. It is unprofessional. I think budgets are very, very difficult in terms of stage managing, you know, and I remember that when I worked at Number 10, and so there's always a bit of toing and froing, and you do brief things out, you know, you do want to give the markets a sense of the direction of travel, but this is just been daily, weekly chaos. And just lastly on that, you're absolutely right to identify they have completely given up on because they realised it would be political suicide, as in, I actually think resignation time, if they were to just you know, raise income tax. So what they're doing now is across all the areas of, roll your eyes everyone, working people's lives, they're going to roll out all these small, kind of this smorgasbord of taxes that are going to impact you, all these little areas of your life. And crucially, lastly, the threshold freeze is a tax rise. The Times did a really, really in-depth report on this yesterday. Across the next decade, with these thresholds, with a threshold freeze, there'll be 10 million working people, 10 million Brits who will end up in a higher tax bracket as a result. Yeah, that is a tax rise. I mean, nobody, as you rightly say, Oscar, you can't intelligently define it in any other way. It's absolutely that. And of course, the other thing that's happening, as I sense as well, this is a massive plea, really, from the leadership to keep Keir Starmer in his job. This is also about warding off a leadership challenge. Yeah, absolutely right. And, you know, the other thing here is that there have been partnerships between 10 and 11 where, you know, the Chancellor has a really distinct flavour and identity. And of course, you know, Number 10 are part of that and oversee it. But I can think of Osborne. I can think of times of Rishi. You know, like, it was... This is not that. This is an absolute joint ownership 10 and 11 budget. So, you know, when you hear people, oh, Rachel's going to have to go. Rachel's going to have to go. Rachel goes, Starmer goes. Yeah. This is completely jointly owned. Completely. And I think there will be, more than at any point over the last 18 months of this Labour government, the anxiety in Number 10 and 11 ahead of tomorrow is off the charts, I think. Yeah. Well, it's going to be the most watched budget, I think, probably in the history of budgets. I get that sense. And, of course, we'll be covering everything live tomorrow on the programme. Big panel of experts with all the responses to those salient announcements tomorrow on this programme right here on Talk. Oscar, let's move to this story. Nigel Farage in the news for a different reason. After he was accused of racism, essentially, at school. He said he never directly racially abused anybody, acknowledging teenage banter that might be viewed differently today, but denying any direct unpleasant personal abuse amid claims he made racist and anti-Semitic comments while he was at Dulwich College. Let's have a listen to the Reform UK leader being questioned on this.
School, categorically on the record, you did not racially abuse fellow pupils.
I would never, ever
do it in a hurtful or insulting way.
That's not quite the same as not doing it.
It's 49 years ago. It's 49 years ago.
What difference to the time?
Isn't it? Well, I just entered my teens. Can I remember everything that happened at school? No, I can't. Have I said things 50 years ago that you could interpret as being banter in a playground, that you could interpret in the modern light of day in some sort of way? Yes.
So he might look. No one's going to defend racism and anti-Semitism. That's not really what this is about. Did Nigel Farage say something a bit off when he was 9? I think that's really what we're dealing with here. And of course, this was an era, Oscar, where the N-word was used in sitcoms on the TV. Now, again, does that context in any way defend Nigel Farage, or does it explain what's going on here? And apparently, half the people in his school that they spoke to didn't have this memory of him.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you watch the clip back there, it's quite clear that he did say things that were racist and anti-Semitic. And then you make the judgment call of, okay, if he's 10, 11 years old, and this is, nearly 50 years ago, you drag that into the present day. And I think this extends to all kinds of things when you go back that far in time. Is that a fair assessment? Is that fair? I think probably not. I think his handling of that interview wasn't brilliant, if I'm honest. He felt quite defensive and inevitably, understandably so, on some quite shaky ground. This is going to be, there will be hundreds, and quite literally hundreds of people whose borderline permanent jobs, whether that be in the media, in political parties, the third sector, campaigning organisations, because Reform are number one in the polls at the moment, where their sole existence will be picking through and combing over every area and aspect of that man's life and trying to find things that ultimately knock Reform off the top of the polls. And that is a danger. That is a present danger to Nigel Farage, and it probably won't be the last of it. It probably won't be the last of it. And look, you of course you can't, no one should be in the business of defending racism, full stop. But when you comb over somebody's life and you go all the way back to when they are a literal child, that doesn't seem particularly fair. So I think Farage will probably brush this off, but it's not to be minimised. And also, I think from a Reform perspective, there is more to come. There will be more to come.
I think you're right. And as you say, there are people employed almost just on Farage detail at the moment in some of these political parties. We'll talk more in a moment. Oscar, stay with us. Oscar Redrup, he is former number 10 advisor to Boris Johnson with us on the programme. Thank you to him. Over to you as well. How can Labour win you over with their... Is there something Rachel Reeves can announce tomorrow where you go, do you know what? I don't like the girl, but look what she's done. Is that possible? What's in there? Well, what they need to say or do that make you think, well, they played a blinder at least on one thing. 0344 499 1000.
In terms of your question around taxes, there are no additional tax rises needed beyond the ones that I've set out.
Don't need to increase taxes. I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes. I will not increase your national insurance. I will not increase your VAT, and I will not increase your income tax.
We don't need to come back for more. We've done that now. We've wiped the slate clean.
The economic circumstances have declined, deteriorated since a year ago. We are having to look at taxes and spending.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 24 minutes after 12 o'clock. Oscar Redrop still with us, looking at the big stories of the day. Oscar, let's move on to this one. It's the BBC, I'm afraid. Yeah, they're back in the dock. The chairman, Samir Shah, refusing to resign despite there being a split on the board after MPs heard of sharp differences over the responding to the Telegraph bias revelations. The row centres on the Panorama documentary that spliced, of course, that Trump speech together. Let's have a listen then to the BBC chairman speaking at that select committee yesterday.
I think the real issue here was the impression left that the President Trump in his 6th of January speech had encouraged, called to violent action, and what we had to apologise for was that, as well as the splicing of the edit. It's my view that editing interviews is a normal journalistic practice. So that in itself is not what the problem was. The problem was the impression that it led, that it was an impression that President Trump had called for direct violent action, and that wasn't the case, and that is what I thought needed to be apologised for. So the answer to your question is I didn't think it was adequate. I thought it was necessary but not sufficient.
Necessary but not sufficient. I mean, what did you make of this yesterday, Oscar? It was kind of interesting. I didn't see a lot of Samir Shah. I was certainly keeping my eye on some of the other proceedings and what was going on. Robbie Gibb, of course, Robbie Gibb was there as well. I'll declare an interest. I know Robbie fairly well. I thought he came across very well in that questioning, and I thought his position in terms of his experience at the BBC, etc., was quite compelling to listen to. Did it do the job that, you know, people at the BBC or people in government wanted them to do? What was gained from all of this?
I think complete score draw, perhaps -1 flat bat approach. They're clearly in panic stations. The BBC at that executive level is clearly in a bit of turmoil, to say the least. And I think yesterday, his briefing, when he went out there, would have been less is more. Buy us time. And I think, to an extent, I think he did that okay. He was asked about his personal position, and again, he was pretty flat bat on that. I think he wasn't particularly compelling on why, when the initial complaint and evidence around the, you know, and you can argue the semantics of, yes, editing is required in broadcast journalism, but I think he probably should have been more overt and should have been more open about just how drastically awful that splicing of the clip was, in the sense it can entirely change the context and narrative and drive of the clip. But I have to say, from a BBC perspective, I think his appearance has probably kind of just about kept the walls at the door, because with those appearances in front of select committees, when they go wrong, You know, they can really pour gas on the flames. Yeah. And I think he avoided that. Do not get me wrong. The BBC is not all of a sudden, all right, you know, fair play, guys, all good, on to the next one. There is still so much turmoil going on there. Yep. But it's probably bought them a bit of breathing room to sort that out. Your listeners and viewers' faith in them ever sorting them out, understandably, they're probably quite sceptical, but it's probably give them a bit of buffer zone.
I think so. That was essentially my assessment from it. But, of course, the woes of the BBC are certainly not over. I just want to bring you this as well, a little bit of breaking news that has just come in. David Lammy apparently proposing limiting juries to murder, rape and manslaughter cases, with most trials set to be heard by a judge alone. This is a memo seen by The Times. We know how that tends to happen. So, essentially, a memo given to The Times by somebody in the Department of Justice. The Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary says there's no right to jury trials in the UK, and drastic action needs to be done to cut Crown Court backlogs, prompting fears this could be the beginning of the end for trial by jury. I know we put you on the spot on this one, Oscar, but I think there are many cases, of course, you know, rape, murder, manslaughter. I think we understand that. That's not to suggest that anything that falls outside of those three crimes isn't also potentially serious. In fact, I think you can reasonably argue anything that's in a Crown Court is serious by definition.
Absolutely. And I think if this is their way of thinking in terms of clearing the backlog, this is slightly less toxic. And I actually think because there's been so much mess, both in the Justice Department and the Labour government generally, I think one of the most toxic, horrific, embarrassing policies this country has ever done was the early release scheme of prisoners. I think that's outrageous, and I think that's forgotten. So in terms of clearing that backlog, this probably comes second to that. It's not quite as horrific in its thinking as that, but in terms of, you know, the thinking around how we clear that backlog, I think denying, as you rightly said, some horrifically traumatic and serious crimes being put in front of a jury is, I mean, if that's the ideas wall that's going on in that department under Lammy, I think that is troubling, because it does undermine cases that probably don't fall into that top tier of criminality. Yeah. But it is still hugely affecting to people. There'll be people listening and watching this that have probably done jury service and have probably sat and had to witness horrific crimes that need that level of scrutiny. And I think also just being a bit more philosophical about it, I'm no legal expert, but I think the jury aspect of our criminal justice system here is absolutely integral. That's a key pillar of justice in this country. Yeah, 100%. And for Labour, as they often do, just to toss these things aside as if they don't matter. Yeah. Troubling for me. It's troubling indeed. Whether this will ever see the light of day is something else, but we'll keep our eye on it. Finally, this one will have to be brief, Oscar. Disability benefit claimants will no longer be able to lease luxury cars via the Motability scheme, which is immediately dropping BMW, Mercedes and Audi, Lexus and Alfa Romeo to focus on value and need. Let's have a listen to the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, on this very issue.
The Motability scheme is a perfect example of what's going wrong with the current system. It was initially set up to help disabled people get around. Now 90% of its cars now have no adaptations whatsoever. That's not what it was designed for. People are qualifying with conditions like drug misuse, ADHD, obesity. The assessment system surely can't have been designed with that intention, and we cannot allow it to continue for a moment longer.
For a moment longer. It should be said you don't get a free BMW or an Audi when you subscribe to this scheme. You have to add that money yourself. But the idea that it's used in that way has sort of raised suspicions among some people that it seems to be perhaps an area they need to keep their eye on a little more than they currently are.
Well, I'm not going to waste your listeners and viewers' time. Like, we know that, and, you know, fair play to Kemi for identifying something like that. But, like, if people have any faith this Labour government are going to turn around on welfare and make those, you know, slightly unpalatable, difficult decisions, but probably, definitely necessary, particularly when we see tomorrow's budget and the result of that, ain't going to happen. The welfare battle and the welfare, all that talk, all that tough talk from Labour, that battle is lost. And that was when the political capital of 10 and 11 was in a much better place than it is now. If they couldn't do it then, they can't do it now.
Yeah, spot on. Oscar on that point. Thank you. Have a cracking day. Oscar Reddrop, former advisor to the Prime Minister Boris Johnson at number 10. Thank you to him. Thoughts on everything you've heard there, particularly on that suggestion. I mean, it is a leaked memo and the government go, we don't comment on leaks, even though they probably gave it to the journalist concerned. That's how it works. Your thoughts? Jury trials scrapped other than murder, manslaughter and rape. Your response, 0344 499 1000. Labour's budget woes. Can Labour do anything tomorrow to actually win you over? Can you go, well, do you know what? They played a blinder there. I don't agree with anything else they do. But on that point, the rabbit out of the hat moment, what should that look like for you? Lines are open. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 25 to 2. This one from Huey. What could Labour do to win me over? Resign, says Huey, and recommend that the country gives reform a chance. Sean says best thing she could do in the budget is quit. We've got a lot of quitting suggestions here, and I don't dispute that that is a very compelling instinct that many of you will have right now. We're living in tricky times, of course. Is there going to be anything in that budget, though, that makes you think, yeah, they've won me over on that point? Just one thing that you think they could do that would change your mind on Rachel Reeves and the Labour government. Lots to dive into, and of course we're getting lots of information. I mean, budgets have been leaking since the sort of Evening Standard story many years ago. Under George Osborne? Interesting, he went to work there afterwards, but that's, I'm sure, not connected. And the Speaker at the time said, we will not have this. And now, of course, we're not just getting little leaks a few days before. We're almost getting the entirety of a budget. We're now learning today that Rachel Reeves is looking at cutting the ISA tax-free allowance from $20,000 down to $12,000. Rumours of tax hikes, wealth taxes, a manifesto breach, a shambolic budget run-up that has stalled property, hit the markets and left many taxpayers adrift. They're even coming for our milkshakes, apparently. Well, fear not, of course, because help is at hand. Reform, the Tories, and even the Lib Dems will probably turn around and have a pop on this one. Let's have a reminder, though, that yesterday the Tories thought they'd try and get in there early doors, make their own campaign thoughts known, and decided to do one of those montage projections on the side of a building. But it was the Treasury they chose. Have a listen and a look at this.
Tax rises for working people. We're not going to be raising tax on working people.
We will not raise taxes on working people.
We're not putting up taxes on working people.
We're not going to increase tax on working people, and that means
that Labour will not be putting up taxes on working people.
I am announcing an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. This budget raises taxes by £40 billion.
We've now wiped the slate clean. It's now on us. It's now on us. It's now on us. We don't need to increase taxes further.
Chancellor refuses to rule out tax rises in the upcoming budget.
As I take my decisions on both tax and spend, I will do what is necessary to tax and spend.
I'm hearing about you in the news that you like taxes.
That's kind of a bit of wicked there, isn't there, on that little laugh at the end. We'll speak to Henry Murison in just a second, CEO of the Northern Powerhouse, to get a view on what he's expecting. First, Christian Niemetz is the editorial director and head of political economy at the IEA. Christian, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
I said at the beginning, I don't think I've seen a budget where so much has been leaked and suggested and teased as this one. And it all seems to be rather troubling news. Do you think that's exactly what we're going to get tomorrow?
We will certainly get tax rises, yes. I mean, this is bound to happen because we've seen a big increase in public spending. If you compare to just before the pandemic, in 2019, public spending was about 40% of GDP. We've now gone up to about 46%. And that has to be financed in some way. We can't keep borrowing forever. I mean, bond markets are already signaling they no longer trust the British government in the way they once did. So it has to come from somewhere, and they're not going to cut spending. They're incapable of doing that because they have their own backbenchers against them. So something has to give.
Yeah, and it seems that in order to not raise income tax directly, I mean, they can move the threshold issue, which, by the way, is a tax rise, of course. But nonetheless, they've gone around and created, it appears to be a sort of smorgasbord of sort of smaller taxes, milkshake, and I don't know, there might be the caravan tax might reappear, the pasty tax might come back. Who knows? But it's that approach, it appears, she's going for, because she's scuppered, of course, by her own manifesto.
Yeah, these are desperate measures. They probably think that if they raise 100 small taxes, each of which is going to be trivial on its own, that nobody's going to notice that this is overall, of course, a big increase in taxes. But this is clearly because they've painted themselves into a corner with these manifesto promises of saying we will not raise taxes on working people. And what they will do now is, well, they will obviously raise taxes on working people, but just maybe not in their role specifically as workers. But of course, if the working person then, whatever, consumes a milkshake of something or something, it doesn't mean that they cease to be a working person. It's just that they will somehow try to shoehorn this into the promises they made so that they can say we are complying with the letter of our manifesto, but of course it is breaking the spirit.
Yeah. Is there something, when you look at this from an economic perspective, Christian, what is it that you sort of are almost begging a chancellor to do that, from your point of view, would provide growth, it would provide a good, healthy territory and terrain for an economy to grow? What is that thing? What does she really need to do in an ideal world?
Well, that is actually fairly simple, and they were already, at least rhetorically, in the beginning, they were on the right track when they said we want to be a government for the builders, not the blockers. So it's not so much tax measures, not so much fiscal measures that you would need in order to increase the growth rate. It's more about building houses, building offices, building pretty much anything, infrastructure, energy generation. And on that, okay, at least they're now talking about that, on making it easier to build nuclear power stations. happens again, which is one of those things where, I mean, this country used to be a pioneer when it comes to nuclear energy, and just by piling more regulation on top of it year after year, that industry has been pretty much destroyed. And initially, they were talking about growth measures on that front, so getting rid of the kind of regulation that holds back growth. That's actually fairly easy. That's where really where the big bottleneck is. It's too difficult to build anything. So this isn't so much about budgetary measures, fiscal measures. It's more about the right kind of deregulation. Just make it easier to build lots of stuff.
Is there going to be the so-called rabbit out of a hat at the end of this one? Is there going to be something where everybody has egg on their face and says, oh, God, she really did do something amazing?
Well, as you said, pretty much everything has been leaked already, so I'd be surprised if there was anything left. But anyway, purely on the fiscal measures, I'd say what they need is simply a credible commitment to go back to the fiscal situation more or less that we had just before the pandemic. I never thought that I would refer to 2019 as the good old days, because it didn't feel that way at the time. But we would be in a different place fiscally if we just had the fiscal measures, the macroeconomic measures that we had at the time. And they were initially briefly on the right track when they said we want to reform working age welfare, we want to make reforms to winter fuel payment. The things where spending has gone up compared to 5 or 6 years ago. They were initially on the right track there, but then U-turned because they don't have their own backbenchers under control.
Indeed. And it is very much, it appears, have been written with those backbenchers in mind. Christian, thank you for your time, sir. Appreciate that. Christian Niemiec, Editorial Director, Head of Political Economy at the IEA. The rabbit out of the hat. Many of you suggesting maybe she'll tax rabbits. That could... You promised me Bugsy, Mummy. Yeah, but they're too expensive. It's a big old rabbit tax. Did you not hear? Who knows? Let's speak with Henry Murison, CEO of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, former Labour advisor we've spoken to many times on the programme. Henry, good afternoon to you. Let's start with the rabbit. Do you think there is, not the rabbit tax, I just invented that, of course. Do you think there's likely to be something in this budget that we all have a little bit of egg on our face and go, do you know what? Actually, they played a blinder.
So I think there's always a challenge, isn't there, which is that the retail measures that are going to be popular aren't always easy to do. Yeah. And the hard things for which a government in the end will get rewarded, and future governments will benefit, people don't always notice. So much sort of unnoticed in the Chancellor's kind of over the cornflake speech a few weeks ago from Downing Street was that she did say that she wasn't going to cut capital budgets. And I think one of the challenges under the previous government is we did get those national insurance cuts, but they were essentially unfunded. There wasn't any money to pay for them. And the only thing they did in the last parliament to make them affordable was to cut capital investment. And the reason why we're in this anemic position, which I don't think your previous guest quite got to, is that the growth rate in the UK just isn't good enough. There are some city regions like Manchester who are delivering huge productivity growth over and above their kind of historical underperformance. But the UK as a whole just isn't growing enough. And that's why if you want to, for example, do something about the 2-child limit, which the Northern mayors, I think rightly have identified as a way that you could take a lot of people out of poverty. Gordon Brown, for example, has made a good case for it. In good times, you could fund a measure like that out of the proceeds of growth. But instead, whether it's a gambling tax or something else, you have to find an offset for every kind of good giveaway you want to do. I do think there'll be lots of people watching who perhaps had 2 or 3 kids, maybe lost their job, maybe in a lower paid job than they were before. Because remember, half those people who benefit from the removing of the 2-child limit on universal credit are in work. They are beneficiaries, right? And I think we shouldn't ignore the fact that many of those people whose kids are living in poverty are going to be better off this budget. And many of those people who are squealing about a mansion tax, for example, pay less council tax than people up north, right? Someone in London in an £8 million house in Westminster is paying £200 a year less than someone in a £150,000 house in Hartlepool. So a lot of people who are going to be paying this mansion tax are paying wildly less council tax than most people in the country. So I'm not going to cry any tears.
No, we all get that. I can remember
their council tax.
I can remember a time when I think Westminster had the lowest council tax in the entire country, and I always thought that was a bit weird, you know.
It is weird.
But nonetheless, I mean, different councils, you know, function in different ways depending on who's running them. So a lot of that has changed. You can wear more than one hat on these things as well, Henry, can't you? I mean, you can agree with the notion of something, but also understand the financial limitations with which we are currently working with. You identified it there when if there is no growth, then you're slightly scuppered as to how you can produce money, which leads us, I wonder, to maybe do we need to almost recalibrate our expectations of living, of life, of what the state can do for us? I mean, is that a new reality?
I mean, we have to realise, right, that never mind the ballooning welfare bill, and I have some sympathies, the fact that we probably need to get a limit on working age benefits in a managed way, right? Which is that what we want is to reward and to support people into work, not to have a benefit system that ends up essentially trapping people out of work, which is essentially what our current system does, that often people can't get out of it. But the most significant increase in cost over the last 2 decades has been the health service. We used to spend sort of 20 years ago about the same on health and education. Now we spend wildly more on health and not really enough on things like education, which obviously do in the end drive growth. Skills investment drives growth. So we're now going to be taxing universities 6% of all their international fee income to subsidise further education. Now I want to subsidise further education. I just don't think that people who've scrimped and saved from Mumbai to come to this country to study are the people who should subsidise colleges where I am here in Bradford or anywhere in the north of England. So I just think you've got to look at this from the perspective of we do spend a lot on some public services that we all really value. And the reason they're expensive is we have an ageing population, and like every other country in Europe, we have to pay higher taxes if we want higher public services. In the UK, we have decent public services. We think they should be better, but we're often not prepared to pay more tax. And I think the difficult thing for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor is they promised something that they knew was very hard to deliver, right? Yep. Which was unless the UK economy started growing exponentially, despite all the underinvestment in infrastructure by the last government, they were going to be left with a choice between allowing public services to remain in the doldrums, the sort of austerity that Rachel Reeves has ruled out, and finding some tax increases from somewhere, and ruling out putting up corporation tax, ruling out putting up income tax, not putting up VAT, ruling out putting up national insurance. They just left themselves nowhere near enough wiggle room. Yeah. And so it would have been a lot easier for this government just to come out and argue earlier in the year that they needed to put up income tax to pay for raising the cost of defence, because that's the other thing that's happening. It's not just that the cost of welfare's gone up. It's not just that the cost of the health services every year in order to keep pace with demand going up. It's that we're also now having to rearm, which we haven't had to do since the Cold War. Do you mean my dad worked at the tank factory in Vickers? Suddenly we didn't need a tank factory in Leeds anymore because we weren't building any more Challenger 2s. Yeah. Now we are going to be needing tank factories and all these things again, which is going to create lots of jobs in many communities in the north of England, but it doesn't come for free. You've got to pay for that. So I think the honest truth of this is this government shouldn't have promised it could make public services better and keep everyone's taxes down, because the very wealthy can only pay so much. In the end, middle earners are going to have to pay more for decades to come if they want better public services. The triple lock probably isn't really affordable going forward, and it's mad that we've put up pensioners' money so much over the last few years in terms of their share of the welfare budget, but the working age population, particularly of families, have seen very little increase. In fact, their benefits bill has gone down in relative terms, and whilst the pensioner population is getting a lot more money. So as long as we keep prioritising pensioners, as long as we keep wanting better public services, we are going to have to put up taxes if we also want to help the most vulnerable with children. And I do think it's hard to defend being against that. I just think it would be easier if the government had been more honest about the fact that it would have to put taxes up to pay for that group in society. And I think it's a defendable argument if you made it in a more open way. I think the problem with this government is they pretended that they could deliver growth quickly. The challenge is you can deliver growth if you invest for the long term, but it takes years and decades to see the benefit. Of course. We've invested for a country for so long that the inheritance of low growth from previous administration's decisions is one that this chancellor just can't escape.
Okay. On that point, Henry, very thorough stuff. Thank you very much indeed for that. Henry Murison is the CEO of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, former Labour advisor as well. You could do, like, logical stuff, like charging for a GP appointment, for example. You'd still be... what's the word when you haven't got to pay for something? Not immune from it. You know the word I'm looking for. In the way that eye test would be, the elderly, pregnant, those not in work, etc. But that works well in Ireland. It works well in Australia. It works well in all sorts of countries. I mean, that would be a start, wouldn't it? That would raise millions, surely. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
In terms of your question around taxes, there are no additional tax rises needed beyond the ones that I've set out.
Don't need to increase taxes.
I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes. I will not increase your national insurance. I will not increase your VAT, and I will not increase your income tax.
We don't need to come back for more. We've done that now. We've wiped the slate clean.
The economic circumstances have declined, deteriorated since a year ago. We are having to look at taxes and spending.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk from Cliff in Berkshire, who says, I'll be glad when the budget is done and dusted. It's the uncertainty of not knowing how much extra the Muppet Show is going to tax us. Once we know, we can plan for the future, and so can businesses. Perhaps we should all send a shirt from off our backs to number 11. Yeah, I think we might have to, Cliff, because it's coming off anyway, regardless. Let's go to your calls. Gillian is in York. Gillian, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. Just a thing that I've been thinking about over the last couple of days.
Yeah.
The fact that they have leaked practically the whole budget Do you think they're playing worst case scenario in so much as we're all sitting here going, for God's sake, how much more are they taking off us? They come to the budget, it's not as bad as we've all been led to believe by the nasty right-wing radios and the media. And hey, Labour are listening to us. They listened to us because we complained, and they've actually pulled back a little bit on what they were going to tax us. I'm just wondering if that's what their game is, making them look good.
Yeah, I mean, it might be. I mean, it's very hard to tell when you consider the amount, as you rightly said, the amount of leaking of a budget of this one has been absolutely huge, right? I've never seen anything like it. They're throwing everything at it. Yeah.
Unheard of. And I'm just wondering, because they have wound back, if you like, on a lot of things. I'm just wondering if they're we know that they do things going after votes.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if they're going after trying to get the votes that they know they're going to be hard to win. And it'll be interesting to see what she comes out with the budget. I've got a sneaky feeling, Ian, it's not going to be as bad.
You see, so that could be a political move which is why I kept saying about this. I hate the phrase "the rabbit out the hat" thing, but that's what they've called it forever. Whether there's going to be something so significant that it shuts up all of their critics, and suddenly there is a kind of positive vibe takes hold. It would be wishful thinking.
You know what
maybe.
It's like. Sorry. Can't do it, got to go hardline, or do you know what? I mean, look what happened with the winter fuel payment.
Yeah. Took a long time to turn it around, though, didn't it? And they kind of... I still think that is almost irredeemably damaging to the Labour brand, but we'll see. Gillian, listen, I have to cut in there for time. Thank you to Gillian in York, who kicks us off. Over to you. I do think genuinely, in fact passionately, more than genuinely, passionately, that we need a complete reworking of our relationship with the state and what we expect. I don't think somebody like me should pay to see a GP for an appointment. That's just one example. There's hundreds of others. Your thoughts on that? 0344 499 1000. Right now, 2 o'clock. Let's get the news headlines.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, who knows what is real at the moment, particularly over there at numbers 10 and 11 Downing Street. Labour, we understand, now going to target savers in the budget. It looks as if that ISA tax-free allowance could drop from 20,000 down to 12,000. They're trying to make money. All sorts of rumours around tax hikes. They are potentially coming for our milkshakes too. They've got too much sugar in them, so therefore they've got to get that down, because obviously the sugar tax has existed for some time now. It's worked wonders, hasn't it, for obesity in this country? But that's the kind of budget we appear to be heading for. A smorgasbord of lots of little taxes rather than any one big one. Is that likely to be the case? And how can Labour's budget win you over? Is there anything Labour could do tomorrow that you go, do you know what, don't like these guys, but it's a fair point, they've done something. Thoughts on that? Also this afternoon, Nigel Farage has said he never ever directly racially abused anybody, acknowledging teenage banter that might be viewed differently today, but denied any direct, unpleasant or personal abuse amid claims that he made racist and anti-Semitic remarks at school. We'll talk more on that. And BBC chairman Samir Shah has refused to resign, despite there being apparently a bit of a split on the board. This, of course, is after MPs heard of a sharp difference over the response to things like the Panorama documentary. Thoughts on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. I think we need to keep coming back to it. The only way in the 21st century that I think you're ever going to get any sort of logical or intelligent movement in our political and economic system is if you almost rip up the rule book and start again, so that we fundamentally change our relationship with the state. We look at, we understand, 1948, the welfare state begins, and whether it's council houses or the NHS or all these other socialised systems that at the time and for many decades subsequently worked really well and are still crucial to an element of our society. But nobody with a straight face could look at the NHS as the obvious example and say, well, 1948, population was 25 million less than it is now, possibly even more than that. People lived less than 10 years, they died 10 years younger than they currently do. All of the other elements to it. Nobody could ever say, well, what it was designed to do then, it can still do now. But with the same sort of proportionate level of funding per GDP and all the rest of it. It just can't do that. And no one calls that out, because no chancellor or government will ever say, do you know what, we're going to do this differently. We are going to charge you 50 quid to see a GP. Controversial? Well, they do it in Ireland, €50 in Ireland, I think it is. Australia, similar deal, and many other countries around Europe. Now, exempt was the word I was looking for earlier. You would be exempt in certain circumstances if you're a pensioner, if you're unemployed, if you are pregnant, all of the usual things that apply, like to eye test, for example. I mean, that's the kind of thinking, and that's just an obvious first thing on the list. Our expectations of the NHS is absolutely ludicrous right now. I mean, lovely idea that you can save everybody for anything, from bunions to cancer. Fantastic. I just don't think you can do that for the rest of time, for everyone, all the time. You just have to get a little bit real on how you finance it. 0344 499 1000. So let's move to the Nigel Farage story. I'm fascinated by this for lots of reasons. You know that the critics and the sharks are circling. Mr Farage has said that he's never directly racially abused anyone in his life. He acknowledged teenage banter that might be viewed differently today, but denied any direct, unpleasant personal abuse. This is after claims were made that he made racist and anti-Semitic remarks at school. So let's have a listen to the Reform UK leader when asked about this very issue.
At school, categorically on the record, you did not racially abuse fellow people.
I would never, ever do it in a hurtful or insulting way.
That's not quite the same as not doing it.
It's 49 years ago. It's 49 years ago.
What difference is the time?
Isn't it? Well, I just entered my teens. Can I remember everything that happened at school? No, I can't. Have I said things 50 years ago that you could interpret as being banter in a playground, that you could interpret in the modern light of day in some sort of way? Yes.
Whoever was interviewing him there needs to go back to journalism school. Does it matter that it was 50 years ago? Well, it kind of does, actually. I think that's quite relevant to the point that's being made here. Nonetheless, let's speak to Owen Bennett, author of Following Farage, On the Trail of the People's Army. Owen, good afternoon to you. Now, look, I'm not here to defend Nigel Farage, but I think there is a sort of irredeemable reality on the timescale of this kind of thing. 50 years ago, the N-word was on British TV. Sexism was not just rife, but almost compulsory. God knows what else we would find if we looked into the cultural archives. It doesn't defend anything, because I think that's the wrong word, but it does explain a context.
Yeah, I think it's important to put these things in a cultural context. However, having even done that, I still think these things would have been seen as unacceptable at the time. But this was someone who was a teenager, if we look at those comments. Now, the thing about this is, this story is not new. This was originally reported by Michael Crick about 10 years ago.
I remember this, yeah.
Yeah, and it was reported that Nigel Farage, which he denied, was singing Hitler Youth songs. He says in there, we've been numerous Hitler Youth songs. But what we've got from this Guardian report is more detail, more of the actual words that he apparently said. You know, we've seen his reaction to that. I think the issue with this is that it sort of has two main effects. Number one, if you're for reform at the moment and you're trying to expand your electoral base, you're trying to get in touch with people who perhaps wouldn't normally vote for a kind of party like yours, and you're trying to make it as easy as possible to vote for you, with this kind of language around your leader that you're supposed to have used, it might just put a bit of the ick factor. But the other side of the coin is this. This has been out for many years about Nigel Farage, these kind of claims. You see it in America with Donald Trump. All the stuff that Donald Trump not only is supposed to have said, we heard tape recordings of him saying, and you know what? It didn't harm his electoral chances one bit. So is this going to make anyone's opinion change? I think that actually depends on how the opposition parties play this, or the other parties rather.
Yeah. And we know that they are always on the lookout for a bit of dirt on Nigel Farage, particularly since they are leading in the polls. And you know, if it's a right-wing figure, that's not a pejorative, by the way. If somebody on the right, then there's always that search for some skeletons. But I suppose, I mean, to go back to the cultural context, I mean, you are right. Of course it would. Some things have always been unacceptable. That is true. But I am genuinely intrigued by this, because the P word is another example, which appears in an episode of Only Fools and Horses as well. I'm going down, Rodney, go down the P shops and get me some sugar or something. That kind of language was, and I hate to use the word acceptable, but it kind of was in that era. I mean, we are talking half a century ago.
We are, but then when you look at some of the stuff that he was reported to have said about, gassing the Jews and making hissing noises, that was never acceptable. That, Del Boy wouldn't have said that.
No, true. That's a fair point. But I suppose a kid, would probably employ some fairly unsavoury comments in the playground of lots of different types, whether it was anti-Semitic, whether it was just basically sexist, look at the whatsits on her over there, or that over there. They would have been the kind of language that kids would have used, and some probably still do.
I mean, look, I'm 40 years old. When I was at school 30 years ago, every comment was homophobic. Now you look at it now and you say that was terrible. So times do change, and what is acceptable is kind of slightly on the edge of banter changes. And I think that some of that you can say is that some of that, like I said, with the comments about gassing Jews, would be unacceptable then. I think the issue of does it matter now is that if you're trying to build a narrative about Nigel Farage, then you could say, well, this isn't really new. We've had these kind of things about him before.
Yeah.
Does this put people off voting for him? I think if the Conservatives and Labour are going to keep punching this bruise, they open themselves up, because goodness knows how many members there are of those political parties, be it MPs or members, who have said stupid things in the past and things they regret. And then you get into this kind of archaeological digging through everyone's past to try and find things that people say, and that's a kind of mutually assured destruction. So I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if Labour and the Tories don't push too hard on this, because they will see this as could be opening a can of worms here.
That's very true. For those who don't know, Dulwich College is a pretty tasty private school, and without stereotyping too much, you know, the old kind of humour of the private school kid may well be, you know, seen by many as, you know, just how it is. That would go along with rituals and other bizarre things that happen at some of those schools. But maybe that's a story for another day. It is worth saying, though, Owen, on this point of Mr Farage, there were people that went to school with him that have no memory of him doing any of this kind of stuff and don't concur with what has been said.
Well, exactly. This is the other thing. You know, there's no tape recordings of this. There's no videos of this. So it is all, you know, he said, she said kind of stuff from 50 years ago. Like I said, I think, is it going to change the dial too much? I think if you try to make it into a narrative, you run the risk of, and we saw it actually in some of Farage's comments there saying, you know, and the statement they gave to The Guardian, this is the media trying to get back against Farage. They're scared about performance progress, all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure that this is going to move the dial too much from a political sense, because I just don't think the Labour Party and the Conservatives will push it. The Lib Dems might, the Greens might, but I can't see the bigger parties pushing it too much.
Yeah, spot on. When you were putting your book together on this very issue, what was your reading of Nigel Farage and the time that you were able to spend with him and watching other people with him?
Look, it's certainly true to say, and Nigel Farage will say this himself, that the position that UKIP took as it was then attracted a lot of people who had previously been attracted by the BNP. Now, that's not to say that those people were racist, but it's to say that those people felt that the BNP were the only ones talking about an issue they cared about, which was immigration. Farage himself will say that UKIP and himself has done more to destroy the far right in this country than anyone else, because they took a lot of the wind out of it. I will say, you know, if you read my book, if anyone can find a copy knocking around anywhere, there are encounters I have with people who are supportive of UKIP who said some pretty rum stuff at the time, and, you know, stuff that actually was not okay, and some comments that were made that weren't PC and actually were quite offensive, and they were some of the supporters of it. The people at the top, like Nigel Farage, they were a bit more savvy, but that's not, you know, you think about Farage saying things like, I wouldn't want to live next door to a house full of Romanians. He did make those comments on the air, and he was trying to position himself as speaking for the people who didn't feel like they had a voice. And when you did that, he did walk a very thin line between what was acceptable and what was actually a bit, I think he used the phrase as dog whistle, weren't they?
Indeed. On that point, Owen, thank you very much indeed. Owen Bennett is the author of Following Farage on the Trail of the People's Army. Thank you to him. I was working at the radio station where he made the comments about Romanians, and I was and still am actually slightly defensive of the point that he was making. He said it in a very clumsy way, by the way, and didn't articulate the point very well. I think he was talking about cultural similarities. If you live next door to a German doctor or, you know, a French engineer, that is very different from living next door. And he picked the country of Romania. It was a little more sort of economically, at least, third world. He was really talking about living next door to an unskilled person who has no linguistic skills in common with you and culturally still very distant from what you might expect. That was the point he was trying to make, and I think he said something on the lines of, you know, don't anyone tell me that there's not a difference between those two things. But he was picked up on it, and he was rightly picked up on it, by the way, and didn't really kind of explain the point very well. And therefore it did sound all shades of right. It might have been wrong. I'm not about defending the interpretation that some people might have taken from it, and if you did, that's regrettable. But I think that was the point that he was making, that when it comes to immigration, what you want to look at is cultural assimilation and similarity in cultures in order for things to rub along better. And I don't think when you put it like that, that's such a bad thing. In terms of what people said 50 years ago, I know how my nan used to sing Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, and it had nothing to do with spiders. I know that the P word, as I mentioned, appeared on, I think they probably cut it out of episodes they show now. The P word appears on Only Fools and Horses. Love Thy Neighbour was alive and well. All sorts of other areas. There's a famous, and it might have been Panorama, when somebody's interviewing a senior police officer who says to the officer, you know, if one of your officers used the N-word, but he actually says the word, and that in itself is quite telling of the era, would you fire them? And the copper goes, certainly not. And it was like preposterous that you would fire a copper that said that. And that just gives you some context of how times change. Now, again, I hope that's an objective view of the kind of era and what that era was going through. Doesn't mean to say that everybody changed from then, and there are people around, regrettably, that still hold, you know, that kind of lexicon and those kind of views. I get that as well. The question, of course, that critics of Nigel Farage are putting is, which one is he? Was it just kiddie banter in the playground? Or is this the real Nigel? That's the point they're trying to get to. Don't go away, Nigel. With you shortly. This is Carl in Liverpool. On this very point, Carl, what have you got for us? Good afternoon. Can you hear us, Carl?
I think we've all said things in the past that would be looked at differently today. I mean, I don't know why we need to go back into someone's past to see whether or not they were racist or said something that was racist. It has no bearing on today. We should be looking at the person today.
Yeah.
You know, I just think it's irrelevant, and I think it's just another tactic for them to try and just derail reforms, progress, or, you know, put some sort of bad light on them. It's just pathetic.
Yeah, I think it is that. I think it is that. The question, I suppose, as I just said, Carl, I think what critics of Farage are trying to suggest is that this is really who he is.
Yeah, but we know he's not. No. You know, we have eyes and ears.
Agreed. I've known the bloke for years, and I've never heard him say anything like that.
No, but do you know what, Ian? I think, you know, there's a lot more going on in the country than us talking about Nigel Farage when he was a teenager. You know, there's the budget tomorrow. God knows what's going to happen there.
It's going to be brilliant, Carl. Don't worry.
Well, I've got my flags and banners at the ready.
I've got my passport at the ready.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? But well, Joe, just on that here, my parents are in their late 60s now, and they are looking to move abroad to Portugal. We've got my mum and dad have got friends over there, but my sister's leaving to go back to Australia with her partner and her daughter. Yeah, I know so many people who are ready to up sticks and go, because we're watching our country just fade away right before our very eyes. And I last night I missed. I was about to go on Kevin's show, but I missed the call, and I feel, and I've said it before, that there's something really sinister about this government, because, you know, we had the whole digital ID thing where we petitioned for it, and then we got sent an email to say, well, we're going to go ahead with it anyway. You know, we're not being listened to as taxpayers, and we're about to be hit even harder, you know, by this government, and we're still not being listened to. I think there's something really sinister about them to keep going ahead and going against the British people's wishes.
Yeah.
You know, the first rule of the government is to protect the British people.
Yeah, but I don't think this government think in that way. I don't think they have that in their heart. I don't think it's not in their DNA. They have all sorts of curious, kind of weird old lefty ideas from back in the day, and it hasn't really gone away. There's a lot of Corbynites as well still knocking around that administration, that they don't, you know, raise their heads very often, but they're there.
No, they don't. But you know what really does get me is the backbenchers will vote against quite a lot of stuff. You know, where they had the Shabana Mahmood thing. And now, when you look at that from the outside looking in, and you see these backbenchers voting against what the British people would find a step forward. You know, they're going against the British people when they vote against these things, and we're meant to just stand around and take it and keep paying our taxes, keep paying our TV licence. It's getting out of hand.
It is getting out of hand, and it's making life really tricky, not just financially for people, but just in terms of the way you perceive the country you're in and the government that are running the country you're in. Listen, Carl, I've got to run. Thank you for that. Carl in Liverpool. I will talk to Nigel in just a moment as well. 0344 499 1000. All of that. We're talking about the budget. Nigel Farage has popped onto the agenda as well. Jury trials could be abolished in all but the very serious of crimes. And there is a rumour flurrying around, according to American media, that Ukraine have accepted the peace deal that's been put onto the table. Details on that as we get it. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
In terms of your question around taxes, there are no additional tax rises needed beyond the ones that I've set out.
Don't need to increase taxes.
I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes. I will not increase your national insurance. I will not increase your VAT, and I will not increase your income tax.
We don't need to come back for more. We've done that now. We've wiped the slate clean.
The economic circumstances have declined, deteriorated since a year ago. We are having to look at taxes and spending.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. 0344 499 1001 in from Pearl in... Is it Pearl? No, Peter. I don't know why I said Pearl. Peter, who says, surely Rachel from accounts cannot raise fuel duty. The cost of living will rocket again. I got a feeling she probably can. Packet of cigarettes. I know hardly anybody smokes these days, but you take the point. On the issue of jury trials, Steve in East Yorkshire says, Lammy wants to do away with jury trials. One question, would Lucy Connolly have got a 2.5-year prison sentence if she'd opted for a jury trial? I doubt it. So restricting jury to only certain crimes could see more people jailed unfairly. That's a great point. And I think there will lie that it's those kind of cases where you can say, OK, somebody might be guilty of something, but there's gradients of, you know, Graham Linehan today has been found not guilty of the main thing that he was accused of, which is some kind of assault. But he's been found guilty of criminal damage, which he is appealing. So you've got these kind of grey areas. But I do think in the Connolly case, if she'd have pleaded not guilty, I mean, it was very difficult because in her case, it happened against the backdrop of anyone involved in any connection, directly or indirectly, and that's the crucial bit with those riots, was put into a certain accelerated category, both in terms of how quick things came to court and the severity of sentencing. That's not unusual, by the way. Happened in 2011 after the London riots. I make that as an observation. She should never have gone to jail. That is the point. And it was ridiculous that she did, but she pleaded guilty to the offence, and the offence was writ large on her Twitter account, albeit removed after about 3.5 hours. Back to the budget. Nigel, down in London. What have you got for us, Nigel? Hi.
Good afternoon. Well, I think it's going to probably be the worst budget in my living memory and history.
Yeah.
I think that we live in a country which is clearly stagnant in its financial outlook. Mm-hmm. And I cannot see this budget being good for anybody at all. And when they go on about looking out for people who aren't doing very, very well, you know, the underprivileged, etc., it's nonsense. Because whenever you raise a tax, it has an effect on everybody. As an example, if they introduce pay per mile, that affects everybody.
Yep.
The purple who's got the smallest car, who just can afford to run it, to the guy who's got the biggest limit, because everything in the shops will go up, all deliveries will go up, everything will go up as a direct result. And I don't understand why, as a first world country, we're so financially bankrupt with the government, which is just so pathetic.
What do we do then? I mean, we can vote them out, and what will happen at the next election, based on polls, reform will get in, but if it's not reform, it'll be some kind of reform Tory mashup. And the smart money on this, Nigel, you've been following stories in journalism in all sorts of ways for years, so you know this. The smart money says, you know, you will tinker, governments tinker around the edges, but nothing substantially changes. The same template kind of remains.
Well, no, I agree, but I don't believe Reform will get in as a standalone party being victorious. I can't see it. Yeah. But to answer your question, I think what I would do, and this isn't my idea, it's been mentioned before by someone else I heard, is that if you were to introduce a 1% tax on internet web sales, just that affects everyone. Just imagine how much money that would generate. 1%. And it's not easy to do. It's not difficult to do because every time you make a purchase online, the credit card or the bank then adds 1% to your cost, and that's given to the government. It would generate millions and millions and millions. And when you talk about fuel duty, lower fuel duty, lower energy costs. Because at the end of the day, it's just too expensive.
I'd rather have cheap. Yeah, if the option was. So you're talking about like on Amazon and anything you buy online?
Yeah, whatever you buy, if you buy something from a supermarket, whatever you make a purchase online, doesn't matter what it is, 1%.
So a 1% tax. Would I rather have cheaper petrol than... yeah, I would. I'd rather have cheaper petrol. I mean, it's a shame that it would come to that because I don't, like unnecessary taxes, and I don't like taxes, Nigel, that are only there because of the incompetence of either the current person in number 11 or predecessors. However, if that was the choice, I think most people would say, yeah, give me cheaper fuel and cheaper petrol and I'll pay 1% on everything I buy from Amazon.
Yeah, and the other thing, of course, as well, is you talk about going to the doctor and paying an appointment fee. I think that's a really good idea for the simple reason is the millions and millions of pounds wasted. I think it was £125 million last year. I can't remember exactly what it was. But the amount of money wasted by missed appointments. So if you charge someone, say, 10 or 20 quid, and they didn't turn up, then you charge them. Or just make it mandatory, subject, of course, to some caveats. But, this country, if you do well your tax, if you want to fly first class or business class, they want to tax you more. Why?
Because they love tax, and it's the easy solution, isn't it? Rather than kind of philosophically tackling something. I know some things are, fairly solid, like you've got to fund the NHS, you've got to fund education, but there's lots of nuances in that and different ways that you could do it. But the obsession with tax is based on mostly the convenience of implementing it.
Well, of course, if you look at the NHS, it was designed 70 years ago for a population 25 or 30 million people less. And if you look at the United States, for instance, look how well their economy is doing. I'll give an example just very, very quickly. This weekend was Formula One in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
It has generated billions of dollars for the city with people coming to visit. I'll tell you something interesting about Las Vegas. The airport was renamed to Harry Reid International from McCarran. And what they did was they built extra hangars for private jets to arrive, bringing people in who are spending millions of dollars. Can you imagine doing that here?
You would never see that. Let me just give you this little bit of info, Nigel, while you've been on. Amazon alone, the last figures we've just uncovered, 2021, sales in the UK leapt to 23.6 billion. 26. So just Amazon, that doesn't include all the supermarkets, all the other websites, that would raise on your 1%... 1% guess, about 2.6 billion just from Amazon alone. So I think you might be onto something.
And you know what? I think I'm going to have to call myself Rachel Reeves now, not Nigel Howden. Maybe try and move into number 11 because she clearly can't do her job, can she?
Yeah, just a frock and a bad hairdo. That's all you need. Listen, Nigel, thank you on that point. 0344 499 1000. Would you support that? A 1% tax on online sales? I know it kind of also goes against everything I'd rather be thinking in an ideal world. Why are you taxing me on this again? But would that be more preferable? If your energy was cheaper and your petrol was cheaper, there's a couple of other things we could throw in there as well. But you've got to pay 1% on anything online. And if Amazon are making, and that, by the way, that figure was from 2021, the 23.6 billion. It might have even increased by now. So you could make a couple of billion, 2.5 billion in tax just from Amazon. And then think of all the other websites that people go to. Collectively, I reckon you could raise, 50 billion quite easily from the major players, including supermarkets. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
And this one comes from Ken in Lancashire. It says, the NHS is costing too much. We could keep GP appointments as a free service, but other than life-critical medication, you pay for everything you get prescribed. Find it cheapest at any pharmacy and you go and buy it. And stop medication deliveries for free. People can pay for that service. May stop people getting a prescription simply to build a history of illness to help your claims, says Ken in Lancashire. There's just got to be, I just think we need a bit of innovative thinking. And that's it, really, isn't it? Because if we don't, we're just going to come back here every year. It's like, right, let's rob Peter because we're going to pay Paul and we'll take a bit of this and we're going to tax your flipping milkshakes and then we're going to, you know, be less generous with your ISA and all the things, you know, people have done to maybe give themselves a bit of protection as they move through the years into adulthood and then old age. We're going to come for you on every single level. How about we just change the way we function? Economically, predominantly, but, you know, culturally, and it will follow. And also this story at just gone 25 to 3. Epping Council have blasted Sir Keir Starmer's crass insensitivity over plans to house more asylum seekers in the constituency. Chris Whitbread, the council leader, has written to Keir Starmer and his ministers over a proposal by the Home Office contractor, Clear Springs, to procure 8 flats in the area to house asylum-seeking families. Let's get a word on this from Orla Minahane, Reform candidate for Epping. Orla, good afternoon to you. I don't know, do you think it's just Epping? Have they got a little map in the Home Office? They go, I tell you what do we do with this other group of people? I know, sir, Epping!
That's how it feels, Ian. That's how everybody feels. We did hear yesterday that there was a rumour that they were going to bring, or they were going to move some guys from the Bell Hotel into these flats, into flats in Buckhurst-Hill, which is part of our constituency. Now, that's now been denied, which then makes us think, OK, so there's now more people coming in to these flats. Now, the thing is with Buckhurst-Hill, is it's a very, very residential area. There's loads and loads of schools. And again, are these going to be men or are they families? Who are they? Where have they come from? Have they got any screening? Are they unvetted? All the usual questions that everybody asks themselves. And, you know, when we don't know and we're not told, there's a level of conspiracy theory that goes around the area where people talk about this. And then before you know it, there's all this, you know, everybody's up in arms about what is going on. Tonight, there's an emergency meeting, apparently, of Epping Forest Council in Epping Civic Centre, where apparently there's going to be a discussion about the future of the Bell Hotel and what is happening with these HMOs that are starting to pop up. Yeah. Now, this isn't unusual. This is happening across the country. So, you know, whilst the government have said we're going to close down all the migrant hotels, they're literally going to take the men from those hotels and put them into HMOs in communities. Yeah. How in any way does that solve the problem or make people feel safer? And does that stop the risk that we're seeing to our women and children?
What is the... I mean, I'm fascinated by this because I think it's, you know, it's clearly indefensible what the government are doing. They're having the same issues in Crowborough as Epping are having, you know, genuine concerns about, you know, suddenly 200, 300, in Crowborough's case, I think 600 unidentified young men, average age about 23, don't know who they are, where they came from, what their backstory is. Even if they're all decent, thoroughly lovely people, nobody knows that. We're being asked to play a game of roulette with this. Correct. So just bring in people we don't know anything about and spin the wheel and hope that there's not a wrong 'un in there. Yeah. And that's the kind of... And I know there are people on the left who get very uncomfortable, get a bit prickly and start to discombobulate and their arms fall off and stuff when they're forced to have this conversation because you can't say that. Well, you can have the conversation, and in fact it makes you massively irresponsible as a citizen, as a parent and as a politician to not have those concerns, surely.
Yeah, but, and I mean, Ian, even if we've talked about this many times about the issues around women and children's safety, around the risk element, the fact that no risk assessments have been done, but in Epping Forest itself, which is not a huge population compared to some London boroughs. There are over 1,500 homeless families in Epping Forest itself,
Great point as well. Yeah.
waiting for council accommodation.
Yeah.
So what trumps their rights for these people that are coming in and being put in mostly brand new or certainly refurbished properties? There's also thousands of children that are in temporary accommodation. So again, we look at the fact of it's just the unfairness of the pecking order.
Of course.
You know, in Buckhurst Hill, an average 2-bedroom flat would be approximately £2,500 a month. Now, we know they pay above the odds to whoever these people are and have long contracts with their landlords. So if you've got 8 flats, you're looking at over 25 grand a month for that one group of migrants that are coming in. You know, so... And then tomorrow the budget's coming out and everyone's going to be hammered even more.
Yeah.
So, and then they wonder why the whole of the country is up in arms.
I've always said that one of the most compelling arguments about this is the economic one, which you've just brilliantly laid out. And of course, if you've got, you know, homeless families who are, you know, sofa hopping, or, you know, kids that are living in bedsits because they can't get accommodation, and you bring in people from another country, even if you have, you know, you can wear a couple of hats on this, even if you say, like, real sympathy for anyone who's, you know, escaped a horrible regime in, you know, from the Taliban, or, you know, in those extreme cases. I don't think that's a typical case, but you take what I'm saying. Even if that was the case, surely your first port of call is with locals, individuals and the community.
One would hope so. But, you know, that's another thing that really has put so much negativity in the community in Epping, where the judge said at the last hearing that the rights of the asylum seekers or the illegal migrants outweighed the rights of local residents. Yeah. And then you expect people to carry on paying their council tax, to withstand the constant tax rises, to see the complete disarray around social services, so GP appointments and hospitals, etc., and we keep on paying, and then the people get more and more and more, you know, disgusted by the whole thing. So even if these men or these families come in and they're decent, lovely human beings, there's still always going to be an element of anger because they're being put before the residents of the local community. So, you know, the government are making this a political disaster on so many levels. And it's just, I just don't know how it's all going to end. It's, you know, it's really concerning.
Well, they don't know. That's the problem, isn't it? I mean, they really don't know. And they're scared, especially the Labour Party are scared to I mean, I know that the current Home Secretary is sort of making slightly more positive noises than maybe predecessors, but it doesn't, frankly, touch the sides, Orla.
It doesn't touch the sides. It doesn't. And, you know, when you have elderly people saying to you, I can't put my heating on, I can't get to see my GP. Yesterday, I actually rang my local GP and there were 28 people ahead of me, and that stayed the same until 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Yeah. So we're seeing such strain on local services, and there doesn't seem to be any end game. So tomorrow, Rachel Reeves is going to put taxes up to fill a black hole, but that black hole is paying for more services and more benefits for people that aren't contributing. So the normal working person, the normal working family are just pulling their hair out.
Correct.
The man a minute ago said that he was thinking of migrating. Yeah. That's what everyone's looking at doing.
Yeah. I think we're all off tomorrow afternoon, actually.
I've packed.
We're going to start with Benidorm because we'll have a bit of fun down there, Orla, and then after that, who knows where we'll end.
Off we'll go.
Absolutely. Listen, great to have you on as ever. Thank you, Orla Minahane, Reform candidate for Epping, and Thaden, thank you to her. That comes back to the question I keep talking about, recalibrating. I'm sure there's probably a better phrase, isn't there? Just rewiring, recalibrating the way a country does business. It's that simple. We've got to lose the idea that if you are fundamentally disturbed by mass migration in your neck of the woods or the country, that there is something wrong with you. And that's the argument that's always, well, he says he's not a racist, but probably, you know, doesn't like the migrants, you know, doesn't want to help people. That's what we've got to get rid of. That's not controversial. That's what most people think. And they don't hate people. It's not about skin colour. It's not about religion. It's about affordability apart from anything else. So there's that. It's about the massive grey area of the unknown quantity of people that come to this country. Many people come to this country through relevant schemes, and the controversy isn't there because they're people that get vetted in a very different way from that end to this end. And that's a system that has been in place for many years. Unfettered immigration by people jumping in a boat and coming over is sort of where we've arrived at now. And there's a problem that, again, you say it out loud and the left-wing meerkats will start creating art. Even some people on the alleged right will go, oh, it's a bit, you can't really say that about, no, stop. We've got to change that. You can say that. You can say that any day of the week if you want. We're not North Korea, and you can say it without being a mad old racist git. It's possible to say that with genuine concern about social cohesion and absolute paramount concern about the economics of it, if nothing else. This comes from Mega Vegan, who says buying online sales saves the environment. Amazon drivers have 100 deliveries in one van. That saves 99 polluting vehicles on the road. Also, as an OAP, I don't want to be penalised financially because I can't get out the overpriced shops. Well, that's kind of rather my problem with the scheme, even though I can see something seductive about it. Great one from Paul, who says, Owen, our previous guest talking about Nigel Farage, is assuming the 49-year-old recollections are true, which are impossible to verify, easy to make up for a convenient slur campaign. Any rumours from Starmer's youth, of course, this is also childish. It is, because what Nigel could have done, he could have said, no, I didn't say anything like that. And whoever said it is making it up. And that person would never be able to bring any evidence to the table in a million years. But actually, he was a bit more adult about it and said, well, you know, when I was 12 or whatever it was, 50 years ago, I'm sure I said some off-colour things in the playground. No, not making any defence of what he might have said. He could have just argued that point. But he went for the, I suppose, a slightly more honest answer is, yeah, it's not like I held somebody against a wall and started calling them the P word or the N word. There was a vocabulary that was liberally used in that era. And it was used by the police and it was used in sitcoms. It was on the TV. Different times. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 10 to 3. Before we go any further, I think it's day 10, isn't it? Day 10 of the Voice of Doom. The mystery voice that is political, keep saying it, politician, dead or alive, young, old, left-wing, right-wing, whatever, Tory, Labour, anything. You decide. Very simple question. Who is this?
Rightly and properly.
Rightly and properly. Let's hear it again.
Rightly and properly.
If you want to have a crack at that, totally up to you. 87222. And if we get a right answer, we'll reveal all after the news. Here it is again.
Rightly and properly.
Who do you think that is? 87222. Back to your calls. Paul is in Newport. How you doing, Paul?
Not so bad, my friend. Not so bad. You?
Yeah, I'm good as gold at this. Then what's happening with the budget?
Well, here's my prediction. Okay, I try to be a positive guy, but it drives me mad. If mainstream media tells us, okay, that you can get benefits that would equal you needing a £32,000 a year job to get those benefits, because they pay your tax and they pay your council and all your rent, all this sort of stuff. Okay, now the national minimum rate is £25,000 at the minute. If they increase benefits by 6%, that moves them to like 34,000, a smidgen under 34,000. So the only way they can do that, because there's a sort of a differential between the national minimum and what you can get on benefits, which is the wrong way round, they're now going to have to put up the national minimum rate.
Yep.
They're going to put the national minimum rate up, which of course includes things like employers' contribution, which has just gone up. All we're going to do, we're going to get into this sort of spiral of, okay, then we've put the benefits up, therefore we've got to put the national minimum rate up.
Sure.
More companies go, I can't afford that. I certainly can't afford it. And when you're thinking you're going to end up paying £30,000 for someone to sweep the floor, and until they get it so that the benefit system pays less than the national minimum rate, there is no way out of this. It's as simple as that. It cannot be that you can get more on benefits, or to the tune of.
I mean, this has always been it's always been a debate, hasn't it? And that's what Ian Duncan Smith tried to tackle years ago. It can't be right that you get more for not working than working, and in fact, it's even more than that because you're not working either. So you've got that factor. The fact you can lay on the sofa if you want to. You've got free time. You can do stuff and have a lovely life.
The worrying thing, though, is they've said, it would appear, we're waiting for tomorrow, as you know, I run a small business here. So every businessman I know is just holding his breath and praying, absolutely praying. It can't be right, though, that in a budget, when the world's gone to hell in a handcart, you turn around and say, we're going to give those people who contribute nothing an extra 6%. Because the sort of the message that sends is it petrifies everyone, absolutely scares all businessmen to death.
You're absolutely bang on. What about the point that was made earlier, Paul, from Gillian, who said that actually she thinks the budget won't be as bad and they're kind of dripping out all this bad news, so we're all expecting a horror show and it's actually going to surprise everyone and we're all going to go, blimey. Now we all look a bit silly.
They did that with Rugby General Hospital. They said, we're going to close down the hospital, And the town went mad, absolutely incessant. And then they came back and said, actually, no, we're just going to close down the A&E, which is what they were going to do anyway. Their intention was always just to close down the A&E. But they threatened everyone with closing the hospital down. People sort of breathed a sigh of relief.
Yes, kind of weird psychology on it. Listen, Paul, great call. Thank you for that. This in from Gary in East Malling. I have a blood test tomorrow. It wouldn't surprise me if the government will want half of that as well. They will be taking blood from all of us at some point, probably to put on a special DNA database for our digital ID. Paul says there should be a rabbit tax on those radio announcers who talk too much. It's a very good point, which is a bit tough on a talk format, but I take the point. Steve's in Bromsgrove says that the problem of tax is the same few people pay the taxes for non-taxpayers to use and abuse services like the NHS. And that's rather the problem when people talk about, the rich people, or they can do this, or anyone who's earning this amount of money can do that. But it is their money. When we start talking about the welfare system, that is not, they should be entitled to more in this area or that area. And of course it should be fairer and needs to be divvied out in a far more coherent fashion. But the recipients of that, it isn't their money. And that is a difference. I think you have to sort of balance social responsibility with a bit of logic in that respect, and that's what's gone out the window. Mark's in Lincolnshire. What have you got for us, Mark? Hi.
Hi there, Ian.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, the budget thing.
Yes.
Obviously, it's going to be a disaster for most people anyway. I still maintain my point that, you know, raising taxes isn't fixing anything, is it, at the end of the day? When there's so many things that you could save money on. I mean, the thing that really sticks in my craw about all of this stuff with this particular budget is they're also looking at lifting the two-child benefit cap. Now, obviously, raising taxes is what's going to contribute to paying for that. Now, the thing is, the reason why I have an issue with this is because who do you think that really benefits, Ian? So it's not benefiting the indigenous people of this country.
No.
You know, with a birth rate of 1.4. There are other demographics in the country that have birth rates around 3. So who's it really benefiting? And it feels a lot to me, and I know, I'm not saying I'm speaking for loads of people, but I know there's many people who feel the same way, that we're literally constantly being forced to have less children because we're having to pay so much tax.
Correct.
Well, I think that are replacing us.
Well, that's very true. But I also think most people, when planning a family, obviously accidents do happen and some people get pregnant and they hadn't planned it, and I understand that. But generally speaking, most people work out what they can afford before having kids.
Yeah.
Somebody earlier, I think it was Henry, our guest, that sort of suggested, well, but what about people who've worked all their life and then they suddenly find themselves without a job and they've got 3 kids and they've never claimed before? Are they not entitled to the same help with their 3rd child as they are with their other 2? But I would counter that a little bit, Mark, and I think this is where you're going. I don't think that's a typical case.
No, well, neither do I. I think that if you're planning to have children, you're planning to have children.
Generally, that's true.
I mean, at the end of the day, you should be prepared to take responsibility for those children under any circumstances that may happen.
Yeah.
So that's not really an excuse.
No, it isn't an excuse, and I would, I've always tried to live my life assuming there is no state help anywhere. Once, there might be a point when I require it. I'm not talking about the NHS or kids' education and stuff, but beyond that, we'll see how that one rolls out tomorrow. Mark, thank you very much indeed for that, but it does look like the two-child benefit cap will disappear. I would be interested to know the sort of breakdown as to who will be the chief recipients or the circumstances of the people who will be the chief recipients. Will we get a Voice of Doom winner? Here's the voice.
Rightly and properly.
87222 if you think you know. Right now, let's get the news at 3.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
Coming up on 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of Common Sense. We're talking about the budget tomorrow. Do you think Labour could actually win you over? What would have to happen? They talk about that fiscal rabbit in the hat. What would Boomerang Rach have to pull out to make you conclude, well, you know what? They didn't do as bad as I thought. What would that look like to you? We are expecting some doom and gloom. We know that much. Certainly cutting the tax-free allowance on an ISA is the latest leak from the budget 2025, going down from 20,000 to 12,000. That's one potential. Oh, and they're going to tax our milkshakes too. Too much sugar, apparently. Also this afternoon, as we've been discussing, Nigel Farage has said he never, ever directly racially abused anyone, acknowledging teenage banter that might have been viewed differently today. These were allegations from some people who went to school with him, who said he was up to no good in the abuse department. His comments, of course, have been denied, and he claims that it's untrue to suggest he made personal abuse, anti-Semitic or racist remarks at school. More on that. And Heathrow has won government backing for its third runway, with the Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander set to confirm a 3,500-metre strip northwest of existing runways. It means capacity would rise to 150 million passengers, with total costs up to 49 billion, including upgrades. Details to come. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. And, of course, you can message 87222. Let's go back then to that BBC story. And, of course, this is not really going away for a number of reasons, but we know that the chairman has refused to resign. Some say he should stay, others that he should go. There is a bit of a split, we understand, on the BBC board after MPs heard of sharp differences in responding to those Telegraph revelations, which included the now infamous Panorama edit job. Let's have a listen to the chairman of the BBC speaking yesterday.
I think the real issue here was the impression left that the President Trump in his 6th of January speech had encouraged, called to violent action. And what we had to apologise for was that, as well as the splicing of the edit. It's my view that editing interviews is a normal journalistic practice. So that in itself is not what the problem was. The problem was the impression that it led, that it was an impression that President Trump had called for direct violent action, and that wasn't the case, and that is what I thought needed to be apologised for. So the answer to your question is, I didn't think it was adequate. I thought it was necessary, but not sufficient.
The chairman of the BBC. Let's speak with Jonathan Liss, political commentator. Jonathan, good afternoon to you. I'm a bit confused about this whole story because I can't quite work out whether the BBC, based on some of the contributors yesterday at the Select Committee, stands accused of being a sort of a nest of right-wing dodgepots or a nest of left-wing dodgepots. How are you taking this?
Why not both, Douglas? I don't know, Ian. I think that there are people at the BBC, such as Robbie Gibb, who I've met on a couple of occasions, and he is incredibly right-wing, and I don't think that he should be on a BBC or in a BBC role adjudicating impartiality.
What do you mean by incredibly right-wing? I mean, he worked for, as he said yesterday, it was 25 years at the BBC and less than 2 years working for Theresa May, who I don't think anybody would call incredibly right-wing. So where does that assessment
Well, she certainly wasn't on the left.
No, she was a sort of centrist Tory, right?
She was. Well, I see you have a conversation about Theresa May's politics. I think
okay, but let's concentrate on the central allegation that you made there. You said he's very right-wing. I don't know what that's based on.
I'm not going to repeat the content of conversations I've had with Robbie Gibb, but he is very right-wing in my experience of him.
Yeah, but in fairness, Jeremy Corbyn's very right-wing compared to you, Jonathan.
just not true in any sense here. I mean, no one's ever, you're the first person ever to call me to the left of Jeremy Corbyn, for goodness sake. I thought we'd met on more than one occasion. You couldn't possibly think I was the left of Corbyn, but let's leave that to one side. I don't actually take your point particularly on that particular issue. Okay. But the fundamental point is that people such as Lewis Goodall, who is a friend of mine, and I respect him and I respect his integrity, he has gone on the record to say that Robbie Gibb had a personal campaign against him when he was at Newsnight, for example.
He was hired by Robbie Gibb.
He was... Look, there are people who have made all kinds of comments about the politics of those adjudicating impartiality. I think it's really important. Obviously, people will be entitled to have their political views. What I think is wrong is when, A, there's a conveyor belt or a revolving door between Number 10 and the BBC, because that undermines confidence in the impartiality of the BBC. And second, when you have nakedly political actors who are appointed to positions high up in the BBC that are meant to be deciding on impartiality, I actually don't think, Ian, that the BBC is particularly left-wing or right-wing. I think that it has a deference towards power. And that for the most part, Britain is led by either small c or big C Conservative governments. Right now, we have a small c Conservative government. And so the BBC is deferential to that. And the BBC is naturally quite afraid of things. You occasionally see the BBC taking risks, and often it backfires. Remember the Andrew Gilligan affair of 2003, when the BBC went to war with the government under Tony Blair. And that was a very damaging episode for the BBC and for the government, it turned out. Yeah. But so what you have is that in the last sort of 10 or 15 years, you do have the BBC reflecting, I would say, a centre-right bias, because the BBC is absolutely embedded within the establishment, and that was what the establishment was at that time.
But there is do we not all suffer to a degree? I don't, because I'm an objective journalist and I'm brilliant, but do not many people, Jonathan, suffer from a bit of confirmation bias? I mean, you know Lewis Goodall, so perhaps that has an effect. I also happen to know Robbie Gibb, but I only know Robbie Gibb because I appeared on the Daily Politics with Andrew Neil a number of times, and all I remember about Robbie Gibb at that period was that he was supremely impartial. The programme was impartial. Andrew Neil, despite the fact that, people have their own ideas, well, he's obviously a bit of a right-winger, but if you were an alien that came from another planet and knew nothing about him, you could watch 1,000 episodes of Daily Politics and you'd never work out whether he was left or right. Now, of course, Robbie Gibb was the editor of that programme and others for many years. So I would say he's completely impartial. I also, when I worked at the BBC, worked for alongside a producer who was to the left of Jeremy Corbyn, but was supremely impartial in ensuring... I mean, the biggest argument we ever had in an editorial meeting was her insistence that we must get Nigel Farage on the show because it's the only way to get proper balance. So my experience there is that they were absolutely on the money when it came to balance.
As I say, I think it's absolutely possible to have political opinions and to work at the BBC and to work in positions where you need to be impartial. I think that Andrew Neil and Emily Maitlis are two of the best interviewers in the country, but you always knew exactly what they thought about things. Everyone's always known that Andrew Neil's on the right. Everyone's always suspected and now obviously know that Emily's on the left. But there were still very, very good interviewers, and they gave their own side, if you can call it that, as good as the other side. And so I agree with you on that. I think that people have made specific allegations about Robbie Gibb, which I don't need to go into here. People can look at what Lewis Goodall has said about this, and they can draw their own conclusions. And they've accused him of being actually not impartial, of it being subjective in his sort of pursuit of people at the BBC. Yeah. I think that you do need to have more confidence. People need to have more confidence in the BBC from both sides. And so the BBC does have more work to do on that particular issue. If we bring it back to the issue that we originally is the subject of this, which is the Trump Panorama programme, I actually don't think the BBC has a particular case to answer on that particular issue, because the thrust of what Donald Trump was saying was absolutely to rally the crowd into violence, and that is exactly what happened. Well, so much so that he was indicted for his role on the 6th of January, and he was indicted for his role in trying to steal the election in Georgia.
Again,
this is completely normal received wisdom at the time.
Jonathan,
obviously, there's been huge revisionism since then. I don't think the BBC has a case to answer on that.
Listen, I mean, the BBC didn't need to splice anything to make the argument about the then the then president's position, because I think anyone could extrapolate from that speech. I don't necessarily. I mean, he talked about being peaceful, but he certainly rallied the troops to get to the Capitol building. There's no doubt about that, and I thought it was a horrendous thing that Trump did, because although he didn't specifically say, let's get out there and have a scrap and cause mayhem and hope a few people die, it was an irresponsible position for someone like him to say. However, again, wearing two hats, nobody in journalism should be editing a clip to make it into one different, complete sentence. We can all agree on that.
I think that what they should have done was to make clear that it was a splice piece of footage.
And there were many ways to do that.
Ian, as you know perfectly well, when speeches are relayed to people, the whole speech is not relayed verbatim, allowing people to draw their own conclusions. Editors do what editors do, they edit. They make speeches easy to digest, so the thrust of what is being said is made clear to the viewer.
Well, that made it sound like it was calling for... They didn't really. It's a separate discussion. I mean, they did make his words far more fundamental in the argument than they actually were. There was no... The context was removed.
It's not such a separate discussion because we're really talking about whether the BBC is A, biased, B, fit for purpose. I think that the BBC is absolutely fit for purpose. But what I would argue the lesson of this particular episode is the BBC is far too fearful, far too deferential. They should have stood up much more to the allegations that Trump was putting forward, because basically Trump was saying he couldn't be defamed, that they defamed him, that obviously nothing of that kind happened. But everyone reasonable in 2021 agreed that is exactly what he had done. That's why he was indicted. That's why he was regarded as toxic for about 2 years after that election until his political comeback.
Yeah.
So this is I think there's a lot of revisionism about this.
Well, there might be, but I still think it's worth putting Panorama in the dock on that specific point. That is, as you say, the specifics of that for another day. Jonathan, great to have you on, sir. Thank you as ever, Jonathan Liss, political commentator. My own experience, and I've said it a ton of times, of working at the BBC, is that it was all... I mean, the meetings we used to have, and I wasn't there for very long, about half an hour in career terms, but the impartiality thing was, it was so laborious, as if, like, we were stupid. You'd sit there, whether you were presenting on your own or with a co-presenter, and you think, you don't need to keep hammering this point. I am fully aware of what impartiality is. I know, the reason I'm in this world and in this job and you've hired me is because baked in to your hiring me is that I already know most of this. Nothing wrong with a reminder. I don't need a 3-hour meeting to tell me that, impartiality. So we had that. That was all the time. And having worked also on national programmes, like being on the Daily Politics and This Week, those kind of shows, and many others as well, that was always the case. And certainly when I mentioned the Andrew Neil show, of which Robbie Gibb was the editor of, there was absolutely zero sense of a political angle or try and hammer home this point. It was just the most balanced show by the most balanced editor in charge and presented by the most balanced journalist. 0344 499 1000. Let's move then to this story breaking in the last few hours. Ukraine, as we are told, has agreed to an amended US brokered peace deal with minor details still to be settled. American sources are reporting this, but Russia has signalled it will reject those changes. Is this a stalemate or is it progress? What is going on? Let's speak with Bill Browder, Putin's #1 foreign enemy, as he's often called, head of the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Bill, always good to have you on. I mean, this has been interesting in the last few days. Were the Americans really reading out a script that was written by the Kremlin? Were they doing their own thing? We're told now there's been some amendments. Zelensky is possibly on board. Now Putin's maybe not. What is your overarching view of what has happened in the last 48 hours? And good afternoon, by the way.
Good afternoon to you. This supposed peace proposal, this 28-point peace proposal that was leaked last week, was written in Russia. It was written in Russian and then translated into English, handed over to some Kremlin sympathizing members of the Trump administration, specifically his special envoy, Steve Witkoff. I don't think Trump ever read the document. He then, in a sort of casual gesture, says Ukraine has got until Thursday to accept it, Thursday this week, Thanksgiving Day in America. And then, of course, the Ukrainians don't, the document was completely unreasonable. There's no way that the Ukrainians could ever do anything with it. But they, at the same time, they don't want to offend Trump, who hadn't even read the document. So instead of saying we reject it, which they effectively did, they got a more sympathetic member of the Trump administration, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, to come and agree to a bunch of changes to the document, which basically eliminates all the main Russian points. They say they agree to it, except for a few things that they can't agree to. Trump then can save face, and nothing will ever happen here, because on one side, the Ukrainians are not going to agree to the Russian 28-point document. On the other side, the Ukrainians wouldn't agree to the Russian document, and the Russians won't agree to the Ukrainian document.
Sure.
So here we are back
where we started then, aren't we? We can write as many documents as we like, but if either side is going to find points of disagreement, then there's no agreement.
Well, but the most important thing, which everybody has missed, is that why did this all happen? And the reason it all happened is because the United States was getting very, very close to imposing crippling sanctions on the Russian oil industry by basically telling the Chinese, the Indians, and the Turks that they could no longer buy Russian oil. And if that sanctions package had gone through, and this is a piece of legislation which has been signed by 85 senators, basically would put Russia out of business. It had been held in abeyance. Trump then said, this thing could now go forward. And then Putin needed to come up with something to like throw a big hand grenade into the situation. He came up with this. Trump is not going to impose those sanctions on Putin while this, quote, negotiation is going on. And Putin has bought himself another 3, 4, 6 months before this topic comes up again. And so, in my opinion, this has nothing to do with those 28 points on one side or the other side. This is just Putin trying to avoid his oil industry being destroyed, because if it gets destroyed, he can no longer fight the war.
So he's bought himself a bit of time in that respect. Is there, the mind of Putin, Bill. Is there a way, because we're obviously talking about the sort of vanity of the leader of Russia and all that goes with it, the saving face. He can't be seen just to walk away with, from a war and say, right, boys, we're all coming home now. Put your weapons down. We gave it a go. Didn't happen. He's got to somehow look as if he's won something. But what does that look like, Bill, in terms of an agreement? Is there such a thing?
No, there's absolutely not such a thing. And Putin's been very consistent. He's a liar in almost every other area of his conduct. But in this area, he's been very clear, very consistent. He wants a totally dismembered Ukraine. He wants Ukraine to be like Belarus. He wants Ukraine to be part of Russia, take instructions from Russia, effectively occupied by Russia. And he's been very consistent. He has maximalist objectives. He hasn't altered those objectives. Even this 28-point plan he never said that this was his plan. This was just some sort of psychological operation that they launched to mess up sanctions. He wants total victory. That's all he wants. And the reason he wants total victory is because anything less than total victory, he looks weak. If he looks weak, his people are going to say, well, why did we do this in the first place? Why did we lose 1 million young men? Why did we lose a $500 billion or $1 trillion of resources? Why did we do this? You're the loser. We're going to hang you up by a lamppost. He understands that his only way of staying in power and staying alive is to stay in this war. And he has never had any intention at any point in altering that position. And it's been very frustrating to President Trump, who promised on the campaign trail that he was going to solve this war in 24 hours. It's been very frustrating to the Ukrainians, who just want to stop being terrorized every night. And of course, it's frustrating to all of us who are on the side of the Ukrainians, who want this war to also stop and to not feel at risk of Russia killing everybody.
I was sorry to interject, Bill, but what's likely to happen next? Because, of course, a lot rests on this for President Trump. I mean, he, famously said, of course, had he been in power when it wouldn't have happened. Firstly, he then said, if I get elected at the last American election, I'll have this thing solved in about half an hour, or words to that effect. And, of course, that hasn't happened. He's gone from tearing Zelensky's head off in the Oval Office, of course, famously, to becoming his best mate and saying Putin's let me down. Now he's kind of Team Putin, and Zelensky might have let me down. I mean, it's all over the place, this, at the Oval Office. But is there a way? Because I can see Trump getting angry now.
Well, I mean, so who does he get angry at? He gets angry at the Ukrainians for not surrendering. That's not going to help him. It's not going to end the war. He's not going to get angry at Putin because there's something going on between those two that we don't know or understand, but it's clearly something going on. And also there's a lot of stuff going on in Washington. There's an elephant in the room, which is that whenever Trump is upset about something going on, he changes the conversation. And so there's things he's upset about that are going on in Washington right now. Sure. And so what better than to have everybody, breathlessly talking about this for a week or two, and then, moving on to the next shiny object. Well, here we go. It's Stalemate Part 3, I guess, Bill. We will speak again, I'm sure. Thank you for your time as ever, Bill Browder, often seen as Putin's #1 foreign enemy. He certainly couldn't take a plane to Moscow and have a weekend away, that's for sure. He's also head of the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. And thank you to him. Back to you in a couple of moments. 0344 499 1000. Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk to Tarquin in just a second. Bit of breaking news. Talks on a ceasefire in Ukraine, reference our previous conversation, are moving in a positive direction, says Keir Starmer. He's told leaders of the Coalition of the Willing. It's a horrendous name, the Coalition of the Willing. Isn't everybody a Coalition of the Willing? You just have different willings, I guess. But that's what he said, moving in a positive direction. Not quite what we've been hearing. Sounds more like a stalemate. Let's quickly do the voice of doom. Before the news at 3, we played you this voice.
Rightly and properly.
Who is that? These are some of the guesses. Dennis Healey, John Knott, Willie Whitelaw, Malcolm Rifkin, Donald Dewar, Mean Campbell, Mark Reckless, Sir Alex Douglas-Hume, Winston Churchill. It's none of those. We haven't got a winner. It returns tomorrow at the same time. Stand by for that. Tarquin in London. That big budget's coming. Tarquin, have you got your popcorn at the ready?
Ian, I think that's Dame Edna Everage. No, only kidding.
You might be right.
Yeah. Just a quick here, based on what you were saying earlier, just a quick point to make. Just I don't want it to gain any traction, you see, it's this notion that I think it was your guest Nigel, was he called earlier on? Nigel something?
Nigel, with the caller, Nigel?
Yeah, no, I think he was like a more of a guesty kind of correspondent.
We had Henry.
Oh, well, it doesn't really matter, actually.
Nigel, Henry, Bob.
Yeah, they were positing this notion of a sales tax of like 1% on all internet purchases or something.
Yeah, that was Nigel.
Oh, yeah, okay, fair enough. I don't like the sound of that, Ian, and I think somebody else has sort of semi-stolen my thunder in the sense that they mentioned about elderly people. Now, my thing is for an advocate for the disabled for the same reason that they are. I've got lots of family members now with disabilities who are housebound, and to have it, that as an extra cost incurred in buying in the groceries, particularly I'm thinking of, is effectively inflation, especially ring-fenced for the disabled. And I just think this is always the way, isn't it, Ian? That trying to find a one-size-fits-all solution it's not going to work.
But broadly speaking, what he was saying, though, Tarquin, was that, across the board, if somebody said, right, you can have cheaper energy and cheaper petrol, and we're going to introduce a 1% sales tax on online sales. I mean, which I know that's very weird. It goes against all of my instincts as well. Plus, online sales are now, it's not like a kind of a bit of a gimmicky side issue. It's how people run their lives now. So that's just like introducing another tax. But is it better to spread the doom there than it is at the petrol pump or on your gas bill?
It could work if they put a means-tested method. If you made a declaration, I am disabled, or a family member is disabled, they are exempt from. But everyone else, you know what I mean? So it could work, but it can't be a broad brush thing because people will be penalised. So it's again the devil's in the detail, isn't it? It always is.
Always is. Tarquin on that point. Thank you very much indeed. Comment from Martin, who says, if anything proves this government hates us, it's rubbing our noses in, loading even more illegal people into the Epping Hotel. It's a demonstration of authority designed to crush British morale. I'm seriously thinking they actually want an armed rebellion, says well, let's hope they don't have that. But it does sometimes look. But the answer to me is much simpler. They just don't know how to solve it. They don't know how to solve it. They haven't got. No one's got. No political party's got the real kahunas to say that we've got to deal with this at the coalface of the problem. We shouldn't be debating which hotels we send people into the country who've come here illegally. It shouldn't be a debate. Why are we taking up our time and, of course, our money, but even our time debating, well, should they be here? Should it be in an army camp? Should it be in a hotel? Well, no, we shouldn't be having this discussion. That's the point, right? 0344 499 1000. By the way, I know Julia was very big on this announcement a little earlier. There is less than 1 week to delete the talkTV app. If you're listening or watching on the talkTV app, you need to get rid of that bad boy because there's a new app in town. And that's the Talk app. It's just the Talk app because the other one won't be working. So if you go to it, you'll just get misery and doom and your life will never be the same again. So delete the talkTV app and install the Talk app. And that's how you still get to listen and watch and all the other bits and pieces that come alongside it as well. Do that now because come Monday, December the 1st, the old one won't exist. Very simple, straightforward stuff. We're back with more from you in a couple of moments. Just gone 3:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, I told you, download it from your app store now. So Heathrow has won government backing for its third runway. This is Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander set to confirm a 3,500 metre northwest strip of the existing runways. That means capacity would rise to 150 million passengers. Some people are desperately unhappy with this. Often there's an environmental argument. Some would argue if you live nearby, that's more noise for us. Others clearly advance the not unreasonable notion that it's the 21st century and you want as many people in and out as you possibly can because there's money in them there aeroplane-based hills. Let's get a word from Anita Mendirata, who is an aviation and tourism expert. Anita, good afternoon to you. So this is now a big green light and it's going to happen, right?
It is indeed. It's a big green light. There's still work that needs to be done, but the important thing is using your language, keeping it green. And that's why it's actually incredibly important that the project was given the go-ahead today, because it's actually going to make us stronger in terms of sustainable flight, not more damaging. It's quite the opposite.
How do you add a runway and all that ensels and make it green?
It's a great question, so thank you for that. I think it's an important one. If this runway were not being created, if the expansion wasn't happening, it wouldn't allow UK aviation, especially out of Heathrow, to change to more sustainable aircraft, which is going to happen. It's going to put in place the ability to switch to sustainable aviation fuel, which cuts emissions by 80%. Plus, it also has an impact on air traffic control. So the entire rework of the airport, because of this whole exercise, is actually making flight more sustainable, even though, as you're saying, it's going to double capacity of passengers and double cargo, which is hugely important for competitiveness of the UK.
That is true. Of course, that's some time away, isn't it, to get to the point where we have electric aeroplanes of this size. Could be decades down the line, by which time all manner of pollutants have been thrown around the atmosphere.
Well, this is where the good thing is, to your point. Hydrogen aircraft is going to take time. It's not that far off, but it'll take time. But the beautiful part here is about sustainable aviation fuel. There already is the fuel out there. What we need is now airports like Heathrow with the expansion to bring in the facility for storage, for distribution, for usage. Because existing aircraft, it's plug and play. They can immediately use sustainable aviation fuel. And that's why I'm saying it's going to drop emissions by 80%, which is huge. So it allows us to have the increase in the amount of flights, but dropping dramatically the environmental impact. So this all works to the government's net zero plans.
And of course, whether people buy into that or not, there is another reality here that this is clearly a very lucrative move for British industry.
It is. It's lucrative and it's smart strategically, because we would lose a massive amount of competitiveness if we didn't open up our tourism and, importantly, the belly of the aircraft, all that cargo and trade that has a huge impact on the industry in the UK itself, as well as onward connections. So this is, again, a very good thing, and not just about travel. It's about far more than that. It really goes down to all aspects of UK industry.
OK, on that point, Anita, thank you very much for your time. Anita Mendirata, who is an aviation and tourism expert. Thank you to her. I don't think, when I speak to environmentalists, Dale Vince, for example, would not be a big fan of this project. Whatever happens to aircrafts in the future, hydrogen and electric, however that goes, how far off is that? Does anyone know? Anyone got a ballpark figure before you can plug in an aeroplane, a big old jet, and take 300 people to Benidorm or 300 people to New York on an electric aeroplane? I'm sensing that's a long way away. So if you are those of that school of thought that wants to advance an environmental argument, I would imagine your case is quite strong, isn't it? Surely. I've just been told by Finn, which means nothing, by the way, but I've just been told by Finn that small electric aircraft by 2028... I mean, Dale Vince is working on electric aircraft, but these are small ones. I don't think you get 300 of your mates on a Beano to Benidorm any time in the next 10 years, maybe longer. Back to your calls. This is Grace down in London. Grace, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I spoke to Farage on a number of occasions previously when he was working where you mentioned, I think. And I remember making the point to him that I make ad nauseum, so I apologise to people who are sick of me saying it, but I'll say it anyway. He was asking about pride in our flag, and I said how ultimately we've got a cross on our flag because St George had a cross on his shield because of Jesus dying on a cross for our sin. So rather than just having pride, we could have humility. And he just kind of brushed past what I was saying, and I feel like right now it would be great for him to have some humility. I think it's obviously the case that people can change in 49 years, and we can't just be hating people for what they've done in the past, and we should avoid being judgmental generally. And I believe that, because I'm a Christian, that we can have forgiveness. But I also think we need to be humble and repentant.
So you don't sense from the statement that he gave, we played a little clip of it earlier, you don't sense he sounded as if he was employing enough humility?
Yeah, I think it would be great to see a bit of humility and contrition, because it doesn't sound like these are complete fabrications.
Well, no, but to be fair, I mean, he could have just denied it, couldn't he? He could have gone no, and nobody would have been able to come forward with any evidence other than anecdotal.
I think, I mean, the least he could have done actually would be to have some demonstrative empathy with those people who are victims of racism and Holocaust victims. He could have said,
okay, so
these things are really abhorrent, and I am disgusted by these sentiments. But he didn't even really do that, and I personally can't help but feel it'd be nice to see a bit of empathy for victims of racism and contrition. And I know it was a long time ago, but I do think that teenagers are not entirely stupid. I mean, I remember something I did when I was 6 that I still think was a terrible thing for me to have done, and I know I was only 6, but I shouldn't have done it. I think we can't just make out that children have got no comprehension whatsoever of right and wrong. And I remember being a bit shocked by someone at my school saying something about themselves being a superior Aryan, and thinking that's a bit weird. And if that person, holds no similar views to that right now, then I wouldn't think much of it. But I think the problem is that lots of people do think that Farage is still racist and just better at hiding it. That's what a lot of people perceive. I know a lot of listeners to this station don't think that way about him, but I think it would be good for him to be a bit clearer that he hates racism and he hates the Holocaust, because right now it feels like he's just kind of
Is Farage, though, look, I'm not Nigel's lawyer, but is his position is usually pretty, it's obvious, I don't think, that stuff. No decent person would think, I don't have to sit here and explain it so that Grace in London doesn't phone Collins on the radio and make the point, because it's a given that stuff is abhorrent.
Unfortunately, it's not a given, because I am seeing more and more sentiments like these on X. I am seeing more and more depressingly horrible racism and anti-Semitism. There are a bunch of people now who are openly expressing anti-Semitism on X, and I hadn't seen stuff like that in public a few years ago, and now I am seeing more and more.
Yeah, well, we've kind of created. I mean, it used to be, and it wasn't that long ago, Grace, when I could always sort of write it off and go. I don't mean racism and anti-Semitism. I'm talking about anything said on social media. You could sort of write it off and go, well, it's not the real world. It's social media. It doesn't really matter. But of course, the prominence of social media and the relevance of social media has somewhat changed. It's almost a parallel existence now to where we are. So you can't fully change it. I've never believed that when you hear people say stuff on social media, and over the last sort of 4 or 5 weeks, because of certain events, I've seen the greatest load of mumbo jumbo written about the very place I work in on social media, and pretty much none of it is true. But you can't, I can't respond to that. But just stuff that's written, I'm sure with good intent, but wildly inaccurate and completely missing points and not understanding the nature of law or media or whatever. And that's just on what you'd call a relatively minor point. When it comes to things like racism, many of those people, I don't think if you met them face to face, would necessarily have the same views that they very boldly stick onto Twitter.
I mean, I think the thing is that people are not only concerned about what politicians do say face to face, because we all know that politicians to some extent put on a front. I mean, we all do to some extent, and I because I have Asperger's, one of the things that is said about people on the autistic spectrum is that we mask. We're not good at understanding normal social constructs, so we have to pretend that we're normal.
Yeah.
And politicians have to pretend that they are more respectful of everyone than they might actually feel.
Yeah.
And so lots of people will be suspicious that even if Farage says that he doesn't support any racist sentiments, they're thinking, really?
But then, I tell you what, to go back to, sorry to interject, Grace, but if, and I sort of know this, pretty much for a fact, if a Reform candidate wrote something racist on Twitter, he would stop them being a Reform candidate. He would jump in and say, sorry, you're off the list.
I mean, I hope he would. I still think it was a bit not ideal that he didn't take more seriously what was said about adverts.
But if he was a mad racist, he wouldn't be doing it. He'd be going, no, it's free speech, wouldn't it? I mean, he knows that. A cynic might say, well, he's just playing a certain game. But he would, you wouldn't carry on as a Reform candidate if you wrote something a bit spicy on your social media post. And they've acted in a few areas like this already, Reform.
I don't think that necessarily proves that he doesn't have certain sentiments, because any politician will do what seems to them most judicious for their cause going forward, and he might think, on balance, I need to sack this person, but that wouldn't necessarily prove what his own personal views are. I think you're right to point out that we shouldn't just be kind of obsessing over things from the past and wanting to be judgmental and angry. But I think that people are quite concerned that because politicians often don't say what they mean, these past revelations might give some indication of what he actually thinks, but doesn't show up front nowadays.
Yeah, that again, some would say that's a very sort of cynical view, one that he can't defend. It's almost a technique, isn't it, on anyone? So, well, OK, he said he doesn't believe this, but underneath it, I think he does. So you kind of carry on the suspicion, as it were. Listen, Grace, I've got to move. Thank you very much indeed for that. Grace down in London. Let's go to Pat, also in London, on electric planes. Pat, have you got one, firstly?
No.
What?
No.
Well, let's give him false information. So, when is anyone else going to have one? There's the question.
Well, what it is there'd have to be a significant drop in performance. I mean, it'd be all right for short haul, say like to Ireland or to the continent. You're looking at maybe 300 to 350 miles an hour, when most modern jets can do like 450 to 500 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And
so you think it will remain short haul? I don't know.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, but what about combat jets?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine.
Well, you're going to go.
Can't imagine they're just around the corner. I mean, it's a heck of an extension lead you'd need, isn't it, to get to Afghanistan, apart from anything else?
I'm just saying, are you going to get 1,200 miles an hour out of an electric fighter jet? You ain't.
It'd be just like a big spud gun with wings, wouldn't it?
But the point
it wouldn't have the capacity to do anything else.
No, but even if I mean, as you say, it would be decades away, but you'll get probably a lower performance. So it would be no good for long haul. It'd be no good to go to Australia with, or to America.
Yeah.
Unless you got a radical new
technology
battery system.
That's what seems to be the suggestion from those who are a bit more excited about it than maybe you and me, Pat, is that, just give it a couple of years, the technology will be there to do that.
But the point is they can't. They've been trying for fusion for about 50 years. It might be another. For example, a commercial fusion power station is 40, 50 years away.
Yep.
So you're talking about technology that is not. It could be done in a small light aircraft, but not in a jet.
So you think that is you're not running with the idea that it's just a matter of time. You're suggesting that it's just not going to really happen because the requirements are too technical and out of our capability.
The only way you could do it is if you had a newfound physics in anti-gravity. And that is
Wow.
maybe another 2 centuries off.
Yeah, well, that's just around the corner, frankly. I'll still be here. I love the way you laughed, like, yeah, right. Listen, Pat, great call. Thank you, mate, for that. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Howard says you make a runway green by painting it. It's a very logical and, yeah, fundamental point. You literally do. Our lines are open. Back with more from you coming next on Talk. Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yes, it is. Lots to get through here. This from Brad in Cambridge. Ian, just how much do the rich take out of the system? It's an argument I've often advanced on this point. They use private schools, private medical care, private dentists, and they never claim benefits. They pay enough taxes to go towards the services I use. When do the left ever consider this with their jealous ideology? It's a cracking point, and I suppose the best example is that of the VAT on children's education, little kids' education is now being taxed by Labour because it happens to be private. I've argued this forever. People who are worth a few quid put more in and take less out. I mean, that's just a fundamental fact. And there are, it used to be, I know it's a certain state in Australia, or whether it was all of Australia, but there are places where if you send your kid to a private school, you actually get a tax rebate because you're literally not using, 20 years almost of education for your kid, 15 years of education for your kid. So, but you're paying for it. So, yeah, if you've got 3 kids and they're all going to private school, wow, I mean, you've saved a fortune for the government. So here's a rebate to thank you for doing that. Over here, we go the other way now. We tax people who do that, and that tax will be there forever. John's in Sheffield on Nigel Farage. John, what have you got for us?
Oh, hello.
Hello. You all right, John?
Yeah, fine, thanks.
Good. Thank you, mate. Fire away. What have you got there?
I think people are having a go at The Guardian, giving them a hard time, and I think they've done a brilliant job. If I could give you a bit of my background, I've voted Conservative, I've voted Labour, I've voted Liberal Democrats.
Yeah.
Last time I voted Reform. Everything Reform stands for immigration, I'm fully behind it, and that's why I voted for him. But people keep saying Nigel's a racist, and I'd hate to think I were voting for someone who's a racist.
Sure.
And The Guardian's done a sterling job. They've scoured his background, gone through everything he's ever said, and they've come up with some inappropriate thing he said when he was 13. So that's good enough for me, Ian, to go, he's obviously not a racist then, is he?
If that is... Yeah, and these... I've got to tell you, John, you're bang on. These guys have been looking for years for dirt on Nigel Farage. I can tell you that as a fact. And as our previous guest said, this story isn't even new, John. This was around 10 years ago that he was, saying X, Y and Z when he was a teenager. But if at the age of 12 or 13 he said some horrible things, and I can think we probably all said some pretty horrible, tasteless things when we were kids and and particularly young boys, and, I don't know, in the melee of a private school. I'm not defending anything. I'm just suggesting that that's a pretty stereotypical kind of snapshot of some kids at that age, right? And there's nothing more recent than 50 years ago.
No. I mean, I'd even go further. I mean, I'm 66 in March, so I was around in the 70s at school, and we still say, I'm not defending what happened. Well, I would defend it, because I'd be going, it was inappropriate now, but at the time, you were hearing it on the telly all the time. Yep. You were hearing faulty towers. He was doing the gym, and we all laughed at it.
Yeah.
I wasn't racist. I weren't having to go, it's just how it was. And if that's all he was doing, and let's face it, boys at school, you just decide to go with the flow. And that's all I can say is done. And to me, he's a stand-up guy, whether you like him or not. I mean, that last call, I'm being funny, but going, well, the fact there's no evidence to show he's a racist, does that mean he isn't? And you're going, well,
I mean, that's the sort of place we're at, where people go, well, I just wonder that underneath it all, because there is a sort of desire for opposition opinion to believe that. And it's the easiest one in the book, isn't it, John? You think you call somebody a racist. It's like, job done. Listen, John, thank you very much indeed for that. I've always thought, actually, calling somebody a racist should almost carry the same penalty as somebody who is a racist, because if we all agree that racism is abhorrent and vile, and if it wasn't so ridiculous, people would just go, well, really? People get upset because of the colour of somebody's skin. If we agree that's one of the worst things you can do, then to call somebody that should equally be seen.
Do you know, you just inspired me, because I was going to ask people. You do, actually. You are my muse.
Thank you.
In so many ways.
Oh, darling.
I know.
Thank you.
Anyway, distracting me. But I was going to ask the audience today, if they were the Chancellor, what taxes would they level? And I was just thinking, every time someone says Nazi or fascist, bam, 10 quid.
Yes.
Well, maybe more, maybe £10,000.
Well, it's the Godwin's law thing, isn't it? That the minute you invoke Hitler in an argument, because there's always, and it happens in pubs all the time.
Why is it nobody ever says, oh, they're as bad as Stalin?
No one ever goes...
No one cares about that.
No one ever goes, just like Idi Amin, do
it's
they?
like,
that
well,
never
look
comes
at that,
up.
look at the Mao on that person. No one does that. Why is it always